3 stray dogs took down 2 criminals, but that was just the beginning. In a town where nothing ever happened, an unmarked SUV parked at the edge of the canyon turned everything upside down. No one saw what happened inside. No one heard the struggle. Except the dogs. Echo, Bravo, and Ghost 3 rescues no one wanted, moved like they had something left to prove. Within minutes, 1 trafficker was pinned. A second was found in the underbrush, and a man, bound and barely breathing, was pulled from the wreckage. The dogs didn't do it for praise. They did it because someone needed saving. This is the story of how they changed a town and started a movement. The wind in southern Arizona didn't howl. It whispered dry and bone-thin, sliding across the Cochise Desert like breath through old teeth. That afternoon, it carried the scent of scorched earth and a coming storm, though no clouds marked the sky. Just endless pale blue, bleached near white at the edges, pressing down on the scrubland in a heavy silence. Red Mesa Diner sat just off Route 191, tucked between nothing and nowhere. It was the kind of place truckers remembered not by name, but by feel the cracked pavement out front, the faded "Eat" sign that blinked half-heartedly at dusk, and the wind chimes above the door that hadn't rung in years. They still hung there, metal rusted, ribbons sun-bleached, swaying without a sound. Like everything else, they had long since given up trying to be heard. Inside, the diner held the quiet hum of old refrigeration and soft country music bleeding from a wall-mounted radio. The tile floor bore the patterns of 1,000 boots, scuffed and worn, and the counter's red vinyl stools creaked when leaned on too hard. The place had its regulars, but not today. Just 3 tables occupied, a sunburned man in a trucker's cap nursing his coffee too slowly, a pair of German tourists puzzling over the jukebox, and a woman in a corner booth eating toast like it was penance. Behind the counter stood Eleanor Hart, 54. Former Marine. Widow. Her uniform now was denim and soft cotton, her dog tags replaced by a silver chain bearing her late husband's wedding band. Her dark auburn hair, streaked with gray, was pulled into a low bun, and the lines around her eyes had the permanence of someone who'd stopped waiting for joy to return and instead learned to live quietly beside its absence. She wiped the counter out of habit, not necessity, using slow, circular motions. In truth, it was muscle memory, not from cleaning, but from polishing rifles. Some rhythms stay with you, even when the weapons are long gone. 10 years ago, Eleanor had bought the diner with her husband's military compensation after his training death at Camp Pendleton. Everyone had called it an accident, but she knew better. Mason had been careful. Mason had made promise. Promise don't just die during routine exercise. She kept the place running, not for profit that had dried up with the highway's detour 3 years back, but because routine was safer than silence, safer than thinking too much. The coffee pot bubbled faintly behind her. Outside, the wind kicked a dust devil across the asphalt. The tourists laughed, unaware of how easily the desert could swallow a man whole. Eleanor glanced toward the chimes again. Still no sound. She hated when the silence stretched too far. It reminded her of Iraq, of the moments before everything fell apart, of the moments that came after. In those spaces, the mind wandered, and hers always found its way back to Mason's last voicemail. I'll be home next week. Save me a slice of that ugly peach pie you love. She hadn't eaten peach pie since. The bell above the door gave a weak clink, not quite a ring, more a shift of weight. But no one entered. She looked up, frowning. Nothing. Then the sound of padded steps, not boots, lighter, rhythmic, controlled. She rounded the counter slowly, wiping her hands on a towel more from instinct than need. And there they were, 3 German shepherds, standing just inside the threshold, dust clinging to their coats, ribs faintly visible beneath fur. The first was older, broad, dark, with a silver-streaked muzzle and a long scar across one eye like a forgotten war medal. His ears were upright, his posture alert, but not hostile. He stared straight at her, not blinking. The second was leaner, younger, with a patchy sable coat and a twitch to his movements, his nose flicked toward every sound, every scent, like a soldier checking all corners. His front paw was scraped, the pad raw. Still, he stood tall beside the first, deferential. The third was barely more than a pup, gangly limbs, wide eyes, unsure footing. He hung back slightly, body low to the floor, tail still, but his gaze was locked on the older one, waiting for permission. The diner hushed. The trucker stopped sipping. The tourists froze. Even the woman in the booth looked up from her toast. Eleanor took one slow step forward, palms low and open. "Well," she said softly, "you boys look like you've had a hell of a walk." The older dog, the one with the scar, didn't move, didn't growl, just watched. She crouched, slow and deliberate, until her knees touched the floor. "Thirsty?" In the corner, beneath the pie display, she fetched a wide metal bowl, took it behind the counter, filled it with cold water. As she set it down near the rug by the jukebox, the dogs approached one by one. The old one first. He drank slow, steady. Then the lean one, slurping greedily. The pup hesitated until she stepped back, then rushed forward and lapped like he hadn't tasted water in days. No collars, no tags, but every movement screamed training. She watched them carefully, heart thudding against old memories. Years ago, Mason had brought home photos from a K9 demo. "They don't bark unless there's something to say," he told her. "They know how to wait." These dogs were waiting for something. She didn't know what yet, but the air had shifted, and the wind chimes, for the first time in years, let out a single, brittle note. They didn't rush in. They didn't bark, whimper, or make any sound at all. They simply entered like smoke through a cracked door, one after another. The first to cross the threshold was the oldest, large, dark-coated, with a kind of stillness in his steps that made Eleanor straighten before she even understood why. His shoulders were broad and squared, gait deliberate. Dust clung to his fur in sun-baked patches, but there was something clean in the way he moved, precise, restrained, like the weight of the world had taught him to walk softly. His right eye was clouded faintly with age, but not dulled. The left, sharp amber, unwavering, scanned the diner with the silent efficiency of a seasoned soldier. A long, pale scar curved above that eye, vanishing into the fur like a ghost of something violent and unfinished. Eleanor didn't know his name, but in her head, she called him Ghost, because something about him felt less like presence and more like memory. The second dog followed close behind, smaller in frame but more alert. His sable coat rippled with tension, ears twitching at each clink, flicker, or movement inside the diner. His nose worked overtime, mapping the air like radar. Where Ghost moved with experience, this one moved like a coiled wire, tight, reactive, waiting for an excuse. There was a flash of white fur on his chest, shaped vaguely like a crooked blade. He glanced at Eleanor just once, and in that moment she saw it the eyes of a survivor. Not old, but not young either. Not broken, but brittle. She named him Shade, because he moved like one fast, precise, slipping between light and threat. Then came the third, slower, cautious. He hovered at the doorway, unsure if he was allowed to step over the invisible boundary between outside and in. His ears flattened for a moment, tail low, body half tucked behind the corner of the frame. He was younger, a puppy still figuring out how his paws worked too large for his lean legs, knobby joints, and a patchy tan coat still soft around the muzzle. But his eyes were wide and human in their uncertainty. He wasn't just watching the room, he was looking for someone to tell him it was okay. And as soon as Ghost turned his head and gave a barely perceptible nod, not even a gesture, just intention, the pup entered, quietly, obediently. Eleanor's throat tightened. Echo. That's what she called him. Because he wasn't whole yet. He was the echo of something still becoming. Together, the three dogs stood inside the diner, now fully immersed in the odd quiet that followed them like a tide. Sunlight poured in from behind, casting elongated shadows across the tile, and no one spoke. The man at the corner booth, a long-haul trucker named Boyd, whom Eleanor had served pie to every Tuesday for 6 years, lowered his newspaper. His eyes narrowed. The two German tourists paused mid-conversation, one of them slowly removing his sunglasses, as if unsure the dogs were real. The other muttered, "Polly's eye?" under his breath, then glanced toward the window, expecting a patrol car. Near the jukebox, the woman with the toast, Judith, recently divorced and rediscovering the West on a Greyhound budget, pulled her legs up onto the bench seat like the dogs might decide they were hunting ankles today. But the dogs paid no mind to any of them. Not once did they beg, sniff a table, or twitch toward food. They stood still, scanning, observing. Ghost's head turned slightly. His gaze passed from the exit to the counter, then landed on Eleanor like he was placing her somewhere in a plan she couldn't yet see. Eleanor took a breath and stepped out from behind the counter. They didn't flinch. She knelt again, slow, deliberate. The air felt heavier than it had minutes before, like the heat outside had slipped inside and pulled all the moisture from the room. "You're not lost," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Ghost tilted his head at the sound of her voice. Shade twitched once, ears flicking. Echo glanced around the room, then back toward Ghost, always Ghost, before lowering himself to his belly, tail curling tight to his side. "They've been trained," Boyd muttered from the back. Eleanor nodded. "I know. They got no collars," Judith added. "No tags. Doesn't mean they don't belong to someone," Eleanor replied. Her voice had gone quiet now, more to herself than anyone else. But she knew these dogs didn't belong to anyone. Not anymore. Ghost turned toward the window. Just a shift of weight. The wind picked up again, a soft push against the glass. From the jukebox, the old haggard tune ended in a faint crackle. Silence swept in again. Eleanor stood and fetched a second bowl. She filled it at the sink. Her hands didn't shake, but there was something sharp in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Not quite fear, closer to recognition. She placed the bowl in the corner where the tile met a faded rug near the door. Ghost was the first to drink. Slow, methodical, never taking his eye off the rest of the room. Shade followed, shoulders tense. He drank in gulps, then turned his head quickly toward the window again. Echo crept forward last. He sniffed the water, waited for Eleanor to take a step back, then drank fast, tongue flicking. He paused once to glance at her. A quick moment, but enough. And in that breath of stillness, she knew. These weren't just strays looking for shade. They had purpose. Something had brought them here, something beyond hunger or thirst. Ghost finished drinking and sat. Upright, alert, facing the window. The silence stretched again. And just then, though, no one noticed, but Eleanor, the wind chimes above the door, shifted. Not loud, not even fully a sound, just movement, a tremble, like something was waiting. She looked at the dogs. They were listening to something no one else could hear. The last drop of water echoed inside the empty bowl with a quiet metallic plink. The sound was barely audible, but in the hush that had taken root in the Red Mesa diner, even silence had begun to grow teeth. Eleanor stood behind the counter, cloth still in hand, staring at the three dogs now resting, or rather, positioned around the room. They hadn't left. They hadn't begged, barked, or wandered. Ghost sat by the window, not on the rug, not against the door, but exactly where the incoming light broke into angled shards across the cracked linoleum where he could see the parking lot, the highway bend beyond, and every person who might cross that threshold. Shade had taken up a post near the far end of the counter, nestled between the booth, where Boyd still pretended to read, and the half-lit pie display. His body low but tense, tail tucked near his flank, but ears still twitching at every sound like they were tethered to radar. Echo was closest to the jukebox. At first glance, he looked asleep, chin resting on his front paws, eyes soft. But Eleanor saw the tremor in his tail. He wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. They were forming a perimeter. Not instinctively, intentionally, like a team trained to protect a breach point. It sent a ripple down Eleanor's spine that no desert wind could touch. Behind her, the coffee pot clicked as it switched into warming mode. She poured herself a cup, mostly out of ritual. Her hand hovered above the sugar, then dropped. It didn't matter. Her mouth was dry. The tourists had resumed murmuring in German, low and uneasy. The woman by the jukebox had finished her toast, but hadn't moved. She sat stiffly now, back against the vinyl booth, one hand curled around her glass of water as if it might shatter. Boyd spoke without looking up. "They're not here for food, El." Eleanor didn't answer. She watched Ghost. His ears had shifted. So had the wind. It was faint, the change, but unmistakable to anyone who'd ever waited for danger. The kind of stillness that came before the first shell landed. The pause in jungle leaves before a mine clicked. The breath before the ambush. Outside, heat shimmered off the parking lot in soft waves. The sky remained cloudless, but the light had turned harsher, thinner somehow. the kind of light that made everything feel too exposed. Eleanor stepped around the counter, coffee forgotten. Shade turned his head to track her movement, then returned to scanning the side window. Echo didn't move. She crouched again, not to pet them, but to look with them, to share the air they were reading like a language. She didn't see anything. But then Ghost stood. No noise, no snarl. He simply rose to his feet with the quiet precision of a man slipping out of a funeral pew. His gaze sharpened. Head tilted slightly. Then he sat back down slower this time and leaned forward ever so slightly, like a pointer dog locking onto scent. Shade growled, just once. Low. Subsonic. It vibrated through the floor, not the ears. That was when Eleanor heard it. The steady, almost imperceptible hum of an engine, not revving, not accelerating, just idling. She stood slowly and stepped closer to the window. A gray SUV had pulled up to the far end of the lot, just beyond the yellow-painted curb where the asphalt gave way to scrub brush. It was angled perfectly, like it had coasted into that spot, nose tilted toward the front of the diner. No one got out. No doors opened. The driver's side window remained up, glinting darkly with a tint too black for legal standards. Did anyone see it pull in? Eleanor asked softly. Judith shook her head. Boyd didn't answer. The tourists looked up, one of them muttering something that included the word komisch. Outside, the SUV's engine continued to purr patient, like it was waiting for something, or someone. Ghost hadn't moved since standing. Neither had Shade. Echo now had his ears pinned fully forward, front paw twitching. Eleanor swallowed. Her throat had gone dry again. There was no decal on the SUV, no license plate she could see from that angle. But something about it felt wrong. Not flashy, not aggressive wrong. Like a room where the furniture didn't quite line up. Like a smile that was half a second too late. Then Ghost did something Eleanor hadn't seen any dog do in years. He turned his head, slowly, and looked directly at her. There was no whine, no bark, no sign of panic. Only awareness. And that look. The kind that pierced clean through time. She remembered that gaze. Mason had once told her, back when they were still new and raw and hopeful, the best dogs, the ones you trust with your life, they don't bark unless it's already too late. But if they sit and stare like they're thinking, that's when you pay attention. Ghost was thinking. She walked toward the counter and set down her towel. The air had grown heavier. Inside the diner, no one spoke. The radio had gone quiet between songs, static curling at the edges like something fading. The SUV's engine clicked a shift in gear. Number. Just a pulse. The kind that happens when a vehicle's been running too long under heat and pressure. Then, as if reacting to some unseen command, all three dogs adjusted their stance at once. Echo stood fully now, his body tighter. Shade backed half a step, lowering himself. Ghost rose again, turned slightly to angle his body between the window and Eleanor. That was when she knew. This wasn't about hunger. This wasn't about Shade. This wasn't even about rescue. They were responding to a threat that hadn't yet declared itself. And somewhere outside that glass, inside the hum of that gray SUV, something evil had just begun to breathe. The bell above the door rang, not with the hesitant jingle it made for tourists or tired truckers. This time it rang clean, sharp like a knuckle wrapped against glass. Eleanor turned before she even registered the sound. Ghost had already stood. Shade rose with a quickness that brushed the edge of alarm. Echo whined. Once. Short. As if instinct had beaten thought to the finish line. And then he walked in. Impeccably pressed gray suit, narrow cut, tailored to someone who didn't believe in bending. Blonde hair swept neatly back, not a strand out of place. A silk tie silver, not flashy, knotted at the throat like a noose he didn't feel. Pale skin, pale eyes, and the kind of stillness that didn't read as calm, it read as control. He paused just past the threshold, letting the door close behind him with a hush instead of a slam. His gaze swept the room in one long, almost mechanical pass, left to right, cataloging every detail, every face. It wasn't the look of someone checking for familiarity. It was the look of someone who wanted to know where the exits were. Ghost shifted one step to the side, body angled like a wall forming around something he didn't trust. Lucien's eyes flicked toward the dogs. Just a beat too long. He didn't flinch, but he saw them. That much was certain. He moved to the counter, smooth, no wasted motion, as if the floor had already been measured, and he was simply walking lines drawn days ago. 3 stools away from the far end, he sat down, adjusted his cuffs, folded his hands. Not once did he look at Eleanor, not until she approached. "Coffee?" she asked, keeping her voice even, her tone casual. He tilted his head a fraction, not a nod. "Just an acknowledgement." "Black," he said. His voice was soft, but with an undertone like something that had been sharpened over marble. Northeastern accent clipped consonants, no drawl, no warmth. She poured, watched his hand drift absently toward his side. The jacket moved with him, smooth wool parting just enough to reveal the curve of a leather holster beneath. She made no comment, just set the mug down with practiced grace. "We've got pie," she added. "Pecans fresh." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked up, met her gaze for the first time. His eyes were the color of smoke-dimmed steel, neither gray nor blue, but something in between. The kind of color you only notice in storms. "No," he said finally. "This'll do." Behind her, Ghost hadn't moved, but Shade now stood closer to the booths, staring at the glass again, toward the SUV. His eyes had narrowed a precise slit of distrust. Echo had crept behind the jukebox, but his head poked out now, ears back, watching Lucian like a child peeking from under a blanket. Eleanor stepped back behind the counter. Her hands were steady, but her breath had turned shallow. She kept one eye on the dogs, the other on the man who still hadn't touched his coffee. Lucian traced the edge of the mug with his fingertip. Slowly, deliberately. "You always get visitors like this?" he asked, nodding once barely toward the 3 dogs. Eleanor shrugged. "It's Arizona. You never know what'll walk out of the dust." He smirked faintly. It didn't reach his eyes. The jukebox clicked, skipping a track before settling into a half-hearted country song. A voice drawled about fences and fathers and roads too long. Lucian's attention drifted back out the window. He wasn't here for coffee. He wasn't here for pie. He was waiting. Eleanor could feel it in the room. A different kind of pressure. Now, not the alert stillness of the dogs, but the static tension of something about to turn. "You on the road?" she asked, careful to keep the conversation neutral. "I'm passing through." "Where from?" He turned his head toward her again. There was no impatience in his expression. No hostility, just the blank efficiency of someone who'd been trained to mask motive as easily as blinking. "East," he said. Not a lie, but not the truth either. Outside, the wind had shifted again. The dust kicked a little harder against the corner windows. Shade growled softly, so low only Eleanor noticed. His gaze remained locked on the SUV, body trembling just beneath the surface like a string stretched too tight. Lucian took a single sip of his coffee, set the cup back down. Then he leaned back, casual, but measured. "You run this place alone?" The question landed like a pebble in still water. "Most days," Eleanor replied. Another pause. "You're brave." She didn't answer, but Ghost stepped forward once, placing himself directly between Lucian and the center of the room. Lucian noticed. His jaw moved slightly, not a grind, more like a thought forming. "Smart dog," he murmured. Eleanor didn't look away from him. "Yeah," she said. "Smarter than most men I've known." That was the first moment his expression changed a flicker. Just enough. And then silence again. Lucian turned back to the window, but his body remained coiled, hand still near the jacket hem. Not tense, not fidgeting, but ready. Behind him, Shade had moved closer to the door. Echo pressed lower to the floor. Eleanor didn't know what this man had brought with him, but whatever was waiting in that SUV, whatever quiet horror had yet to announce itself, the dogs already knew. And Lucian? Lucian Drake was just getting started. Ghost moved. Not quickly, not with alarm. He rose from his position near the window and padded silently toward the door, as if answering something that no one else had heard. His steps were precise, deliberate, barely brushing the floor, and yet somehow the room felt colder as he passed. Eleanor felt it before she saw it, that internal catch in the chest. The shift of atmosphere when a moment becomes more than itself. She glanced from Ghost to Lucian, whose head was still turned toward the window, unreadable. His coffee sat untouched. His hand rested lightly on his thigh, close to the edge of his coat. Ghost stopped at the glass door. His body lowered slightly, not crouching, but centering, like a soldier leaning into reconnaissance. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just stared out into the blinding sunlight with the poise of something that knew exactly what it was looking for. Eleanor's body moved before her mind caught up. She walked toward the dog slowly, towel still in hand, eyes never leaving him. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as she pushed it open, and the Arizona heat greeted her like a wall of breath. She stepped outside. The air shimmered around her dry, metallic. The desert sun had climbed higher, making every surface glare with too much light. The gray SUV was still there, engine humming softly. It hadn't moved. No windows had rolled down. No doors had opened. But Ghost stood frozen at the edge of the sidewalk, eyes fixed on the vehicle like it had spoken. And then he did something Eleanor hadn't expected. He raised his front paw and tapped it against the concrete. Once, twice, 3 times. Paw, paw, paw. The sound was almost delicate, like fingertips knocking gently on a locked door. But to Eleanor, it hit like thunder. Her breath hitched. She stared at the dog, then at the SUV. The windshield reflected the bright white sky, but the side windows were darker, almost black, tinted too deeply to be legal. Still, through the glare, she stepped closer. 1 step, another. Ghost didn't move. He simply tilted his head not toward the SUV, but toward her, inviting her forward, inviting her in. Eleanor reached the passenger side window and leaned slightly, eyes narrowing, trying to adjust against the light. And there barely she saw it. A flicker of motion. She leaned closer. Ghost stepped to her side, silent as a shadow. And then she saw him. Behind the dark glass, in the tight, sun-baked cage of the SUV, was the outline of a man, slumped sideways against the passenger window, face bruised and sweat-slicked. One eye swollen nearly shut. A length of duct tape stretched across his wrists, pinning them to his lap. And his eyes, the one not swollen, were open. Eleanor blinked. Her heart was racing now, but her limbs stayed still. Trained stillness. Instinct. Decades-old discipline returning like it had only been asleep. The man behind the glass looked straight at her. Then, with painful, deliberate effort, he blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. He paused, then did it again. Blink, 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 blink. Eleanor's knees went weak. She gripped the edge of the window for balance, breath shallow, eyes wide. The heat pressed in on her from all sides, but it was the cold rising up from her stomach that nearly dropped her. Jesus, she whispered. Number. She knew this code. Everyone in her unit had learned it. 3 blinks, 3 taps, 3 scratches. The universal distress signal for when your voice was gagged, your hands were tied, and your hope was fading fast. She remembered Mason how he'd practiced it with her in the kitchen one night, tapping 3 times on the kitchen counter. If I ever go missing, he'd said, half laughing, and you see me on television blinking like a damn moth, don't you dare ignore it. 3 taps. Ghost stood beside her now, utterly motionless, head still, ears up. The man inside blinked again. Blink, blink, blink. Eleanor's throat tightened. I see you, she whispered. For a split second, she thought she saw relief in his eye. Then he slumped again, too weak to hold himself upright. She stepped back from the SUV, her hands trembling now. She looked down at Ghost, who simply stared at the vehicle, then back to her, the calm of purpose in his gaze. He had brought her here. He had shown her. This wasn't random. This wasn't animal intuition. This was communication. She reached into her apron pocket, fingers fumbling, and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Call 911? Number. Not yet. She needed someone who would believe her, someone who wouldn't laugh when she said, "A dog just showed me an SOS." She scrolled. One name. Sheriff Alondra Vega. Mason's old friend. Her old friend. She tapped the name. Ghost sat down beside her. The phone rang once, then clicked. Sheriff Vega, came the voice, crisp, calm, no nonsense. Eleanor didn't waste time. Alondra, it's Eleanor Hart. A pause. El, what's going on? I need you to come to the Red Mesa diner, right now. Why? What happened? There's a man. In a vehicle. He's restrained. Duct tape. He's blinking SOS at me through the glass. Another pause, sharper this time. What? Are you sure? Eleanor looked down at Ghost. His eyes hadn't left the SUV. No, she said quietly. But the dogs are. Alondra exhaled audibly on the other end. I'm on my way. 10 minutes. Don't do anything. I'm not alone, Eleanor replied. And neither is he. She ended the call. Ghost rose to his feet. Shade and Echo were now visible through the diner windows, watching her. Eleanor turned and looked back at the SUV. The engine still hummed, steady as a pulse. And for the first time in over a decade, she felt that old fire rise again, the one born in war zones and kept quiet ever since. We don't run. We respond. She took one final look at Ghost. Thank you, she whispered. The wind kicked dust around their ankles. And the storm, though silent, had already begun. Eleanor stepped back from the SUV as if it had burned her, not with fire, but with recognition. The heat pressed down around her, but she barely felt it now. Her pulse thudded like boots against sandbags, old rhythms returning. Somewhere behind her, Ghost exhaled slowly through his nose, still watching, still silent, still waiting. She stared down at her phone. Her hands didn't shake, but only because they'd done this before in darker places, under harsher lights. Fear didn't always come as panic. Sometimes, it just arrived as focus. She tapped the name before she could second-guess it. Alondra Vega. The phone rang once, then twice. A click. Sheriff Vega. That voice. Still steel. Wrapped. Still grounded. It's me, Eleanor said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. The brief kind that comes from rewinding a decade in a heartbeat. Eleanor? Alondra's tone shifted not softer, but steadier. You all right? I need you to come to Red Mesa. Right now. Another pause. Longer. What's going on? There's a man inside a gray SUV, parked just past the curb in front of my diner. He's duct taped, wrists and ankles. Looks military, maybe Marine. He's conscious. Barely. And he's blinking. 3 times. Over and over. Blinking? The voice dipped low, searching for clarity. 3 blinks. Then a pause. Then 3 again. Repeating. A breath over the line. You think it's... I don't think, Eleanor said. I know. Alondra went quiet. Eleanor glanced back at the SUV, then at Ghost. He had returned to a seated position at her side, tail curled neatly, muscles taut beneath the old fur. I saw it in his eyes, Eleanor said more to herself now. He was begging, without a sound. Are you sure? Eleanor swallowed. A memory broke through her voice like gravel beneath water. Number, but the dogs are. That held weight. She knew it would. On the other end of the line, Alondra took a slow breath. Eleanor could hear the wind faintly against the patrol car's speaker, knew from the way it whistled that she was already outside. How many dogs? Alondra asked. 3. Shepherds. Trained. No tags. No collars. But they're coordinated. Ghost is leading them. I don't know if that's his real name. It's just what I call him. Ghost, Alondra repeated, tone flattening into memory. Just like Mason's dog. Eleanor froze. It had been years since she'd heard that name aloud, not said in past tense, not said with pity or protocol. Just said, yeah, she replied, voice brittle. Just like that. Silence again. Then Eleanor spoke, slowly, almost against her will. You remember the kitchen? She asked. What part? That night, he was home between deployments. He brought back that field manual, the one with the distress codes. Alondra exhaled a soft sound of recognition. He tapped the counter, Eleanor continued. 3 times. Just messing around. I told him it was creepy. He laughed. Alondra murmured. Oh, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of guilt, of things never said after Mason's funeral, of the heavy stillness between 2 women who had once sat on either side of the same man and called him family. I didn't call you after he died, Eleanor said finally. I know. I didn't know what to say. You didn't have to. Another pause. Then Alondra's voice sharpened back into form. All command now. Okay, Al, listen to me. You said the vehicle's still parked? Yes. Anyone near it? Number. But someone's inside. Hurt. And someone dangerous put him there. I've got a man inside the diner. Lucian Drake. He's wrong. Doesn't feel like a tourist. Came in after the dogs. Never touched his coffee. You think he's armed? I know he is. Shoulder holster. Thought he was hiding it. He wasn't. Do not engage. I wasn't planning on it. Do you have a weapon? Number. Just my mouth. And a lot of stainless steel. Alondra let out a dry breath, the closest thing she ever had to a laugh. All right, I'm coming in light, no sirens. Just me and one deputy. Etta, 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Eleanor repeated. Don't do anything unless you have to. I haven't moved since he blinked the first time. You think this is real? Alondra asked. I don't think, Eleanor whispered. I remember. On the other end, Alondra's voice softened. 10 minutes, Elle. Eleanor ended the call and slowly lowered the phone. Ghost stood beside her. Echo now pressed against the inside of the door, eyes watching her through the glass. Shade had shifted closer to the counter. The SUV still hummed quietly. The man inside had gone still again, but his one open eye remained fixed, waiting. She looked out across the highway, toward the shimmer of distant road. Nothing yet. But 10 minutes was both a promise and a countdown. Eleanor closed her eyes, and for a split second, she was back in that small kitchen again, Mason's hands tapping against the tile. 3 quick raps, that crooked smile of his, the way he said, sometimes you don't get to scream, so you learn how to speak in silence. She opened her eyes again. Ghost nudged her hand once, just a touch. Grounding. 10 minutes, she whispered. And then, very quietly, she walked back toward the diner. The door to the diner closed behind Eleanor with a soft click, but inside, it was as if someone had sealed a vacuum. No music, no chatter, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady thrum of tension vibrating beneath the tile. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel natural. It pressed on the eardrums, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She stepped past the threshold, hand grazing the edge of the counter without thinking. Ghost followed closely at her side, steps silent, his eyes never once leaving the front window. He took his place again, not lying down, not fully at ease, just ready. Echo shifted toward the back of the room, his small frame squeezing between the end of the jukebox and the mounted shelf of sugar jars. His ears flicked nervously, nose twitching with small, jerky huffs of breath. Shade padded the opposite direction, angling himself between the kitchen pass-through and the restrooms. A different vantage point, a different arc of vision. Each dog had taken a sector, without a word spoken. They were forming a perimeter again. This wasn't behavior born of fear. It was strategy. Eleanor took a slow breath. The patrons, for their part, were beginning to feel it, though none of them could name it yet. That creeping tension that slides down the back of your neck when your instincts know something long before your thoughts do. Boyd, the trucker in the corner booth, had stopped reading entirely. His newspaper lay folded in his lap, untouched. He glanced toward the front window, then at the dogs, then at Eleanor, as if waiting for someone to say the thing nobody wanted to say. Judith, the woman by the jukebox, tapped the rim of her water glass with her fingernail. Once, then twice, then stopped. Her hand hovered midair like she had just remembered a rule, no sudden movements. The 2 tourists at the center table exchanged a low string of German. One reached for his backpack but froze when Shade's eyes flicked toward him. He put the strap down without a word. Everyone felt it now. Something was wrong. But only the dogs knew where. And only Eleanor knew why. She moved back behind the counter, picking up the coffee pot, not because she needed to, but because not doing something felt worse. She topped off Judith's glass without asking. The woman gave a tight smile. More reflex than thanks. Ghost was staring at the door again. His ears had lifted, not straight, but angled slightly back. His body leaned forward, just enough to look casual to the untrained eye. But Eleanor had lived with Marines long enough to recognize a ready stance when she saw it. Echo gave a low huff. Not a bark, just air through the nose. Nervous energy laced with expectation. Shade began pacing 5 steps forward, 5 back, pausing each time at the kitchen's swinging door before turning again. A sentry on a metal loop. Eleanor's hand found the towel by the register. She wiped the counter slowly, eyes scanning every corner of the room without turning her head. She could feel it crawling along the edges of her mind now, that old, familiar tickle of adrenaline before a breach. The way you start to count exits without knowing you're doing it. Front door, kitchen rear, side hall to the restrooms. One way in, two ways out. Her gaze drifted toward Lucien. He was still seated at the counter, still unmoved, still perfectly composed. His coffee sat untouched, a thin ring of steam now fading into the dry air. His left hand rested flat on the formica. His right, the one nearest his coat, tapped the counter softly. Not a rhythm, just a habit. Tap. Pause. Tap. He wasn't pretending anymore, not trying to be friendly. He didn't even look at Eleanor when she passed. And that scared her more than anything, because it meant whatever mask he'd worn before it had served its purpose. Now, he was just waiting. Her phone buzzed once in her apron pocket. A single vibration. No ring. She pulled it out discreetly. A message from Alondra. 2 minutes out. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Eleanor breathed in through her nose and folded the phone shut. She didn't respond. From the corner of the room, Ghost's head turned not toward her, but toward the door. He heard it. A faint shift in the gravel outside. A rustle. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. And still, no one in the diner moved. Judith looked at Eleanor. What's going on? Eleanor shook her head gently. I don't know yet. Another truth wrapped in silence. Boyd leaned forward, voice gravel-soft. Are we in danger? Eleanor looked at the 3 dogs, each one now fixed in place, staring at different parts of the building, like they were holding up the walls with nothing but posture and prayer. She could feel Mason again, hear his voice echoing in the back of her memory. If they don't bark, but they don't relax, pay attention, Elle. That's when the world is making up its mind about you. Eleanor straightened. No, she said, answering Boyd. Not yet. Outside, tires crunched the shoulder of the road. A faint reflection of sunlight blinked across the glass. Ghost stood. Shade paused mid-step. Echo whined again, barely audible, and flattened to the floor. 10 seconds later, the wind chimes above the door moved for the first time since Eleanor had returned. Still no sound, but the air inside the diner had changed, like the breath before thunder. Like the moment before things began to fall apart. Lucien Drake hadn't touched his coffee in over 20 minutes. The once steaming cup now sat untouched, rim lined with faint condensation. The surface, a mirror reflecting the dull lights above the counter. His coat, impeccably tailored, almost too smooth for this desert setting, hung open just enough to hint at the sleek silver of something holstered underneath. But it wasn't the untouched drink or the gleam of hidden steel that unnerved Eleanor. It was the way he watched. Not openly, not crudely, but methodically, like a man who'd measured silence and found it useful. He didn't fidget, didn't smile, didn't speak. Only his fingers moved, tapping an invisible rhythm against the cracked laminate surface of the counter. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It wasn't a song, it was a signal. Or maybe a countdown. Ghost stood at the edge of the room now, halfway between Eleanor and the front door. His body was still, but his eyes moved constantly, tracking Lucien's hands, watching every twitch of a knuckle, every subtle curl of his pinky, as though deciphering a language no human could hear. And maybe he was. Shade had frozen mid-pace, pressed flat against the base of the kitchen wall. His hackles weren't raised, but his breathing had become measured and slow, like someone preparing to hold their breath underwater. Echo had wedged himself behind the booth where the German tourist sat, head low, eyes up. He didn't blink often, didn't whimper anymore. He was learning from the other two now, copying their stillness, their restraint. Lucien's head tilted slightly to the left, his attention drifting once again toward the front window, the 3rd time in 2 minutes. Eleanor noticed. He wasn't just waiting anymore, he was tracking something. She moved, subtly behind the counter, pretending to adjust the napkin holder. Ghost's head followed. Lucien's gaze flicked toward her, then back to the door, then to the window again, and then just for a heartbeat his eyes narrowed, focused, almost imperceptibly. Eleanor's breath caught. He saw something. Outside, in the shimmer of desert heat, dust curled low to the ground like a sigh. Sheriff Vega hadn't arrived yet, but something or someone had drawn Lucien's attention. And now, The air in the diner wasn't just tense. It was calibrated, measured between predator and prey. Ghost moved. Not much, just 3 slow steps forward. His paws made no sound on the old tile. He stopped beside the metal stool where Eleanor stood, and then very deliberately he lowered his body and scratched the floor. Once, twice, a pause, then the third. Paw, paw, paw. The sound was soft, but it hit Eleanor like a thunderclap. She went completely still. The same signal Mason used in the field. The same one she'd taught herself to forget. 3 taps means help. 3 taps means alive. 3 taps means don't wait. Lucian's eyes flicked again. He had heard the sound, too. But he didn't move. Not yet. Ghost turned his head slightly, just enough so Eleanor could see his face. Not a growl, not a whine. Just that same solemn, weathered stare that didn't beg for trust. It demanded it. And then, just as quietly, he scratched again. Paw, paw, paw. This time, Eleanor knelt, pretending to fix the stool, pretending to check a loose bolt. But really, she was reaching for her phone again beneath the counter, hidden by the towel she'd folded earlier. Lucian's fingers had stopped tapping. He was watching her now. Not her hands, not her body, her eyes. Eleanor didn't blink. She didn't speak. And yet, she knew. He suspects. Behind her, Judith stood up shakily from her seat and whispered to Boyd, "I don't like this." Boyd gave a tiny shake of the head. "Don't move yet," he murmured. "Something's happening." Ghost leaned in, barely brushing Eleanor's leg. She remembered the last time she saw Mason kneel like this, in the ruins of a safe house outside Kandahar, tapping 3 times against a steel beam when his voice couldn't rise through the smoke. He had told her, years later, "Sometimes a signal is all you have, Elle. Words can be intercepted. Signals? You feel them in your bones." She could feel it now. Ghost had given the signal, and Lucian knew, but it was Eleanor who had to decide what to do with it. Shade, still in the kitchen hallway, had taken a low crouch, eyes locked, now not on Lucian, but on the back door. Echo shifted his weight, ears flattened. His paw inched toward the base of the booth. Not panic, not fear, preparation. Lucian's hand slipped from the counter and hovered just a little too long near his coat. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. But it was enough. Enough for Ghost to step in front of Eleanor now, his body angled sideways, shielding her without touching her. Enough for Shade to begin a slow, stalking walk toward the kitchen, without breaking eye contact with Lucian. Enough for Eleanor to raise her eyes and whisper. Only loud enough for Ghost to hear, "Don't move unless I do." And then, the front door creaked slightly. Not opening, just shifting on its hinges. Wind, maybe. Maybe not. Lucian's mouth twitched. And Eleanor, standing fully upright now behind the counter, finally spoke. "Would you like your coffee warmed up?" Lucian turned to her, eyes unreadable. For the first time since he entered, he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said softly, fingers grazing the edge of the counter. "It's exactly how I like it." The bell over the diner door jingled a sound so ordinary, so benign, that it rang out like a gunshot in the taut silence. Every eye turned. A figure stepped through, squinting against the sudden change from sun to shadow. Dust clung to his jeans, boots worn thin at the soles, a backpack slung haphazardly over one shoulder. He was young, maybe 22, with messy, sun-streaked hair and a cautious energy, like someone used to reading the room before he ever opened his mouth. The young man paused just inside the threshold. His name was Benji, and though he didn't know it yet, his timing had just shifted the weight of everything. Lucian's fingers, which had been resting quietly near the seam of his coat, froze. Shade twitched. Echo stood. Ghost didn't move. The tension in the room coiled tighter. Benji blinked, thrown off by the intensity of attention now pointed squarely at him. I was just looking for water," he said, voice hoarse from the road. "My car, well, what's left of it is a few miles back that way, caught a rock to the radiator." He lifted both hands slightly, palms up, an unconscious gesture of peace. Lucian's smile returned, polite and thin. He leaned back ever so slightly on the stool, masking his momentary confusion with cool control. "Bad luck," he said smoothly. Desert's got teeth. Benji nodded, glancing toward the counter. Is it all right if I just sit a minute? I swear I'm not here to cause trouble. Eleanor had already begun pouring a glass of water before he finished the sentence. Her hands moved calmly, but inside, something was shifting. Not because of Benji, but because of Lucien. The man in the tailored coat had glanced toward the window one too many times, had reached for his jacket 1 second too long, had smiled in a way that never touched his eyes. The arrival of the boy wasn't an interruption. It was an opportunity. And Ghost had seen it too. Eleanor placed the water gently on the counter and gave a small nod to Benji. You're safe here, she said softly. The boy looked at her a little too long, then at the dogs. Ghost didn't blink. Shed's eyes narrowed. Echo sniffed the air once, then shifted back, settling near the wall. Lucien's gaze drifted toward Benji, reading him like a page he didn't particularly care for. Where'd you say your car was? Lucien asked, with too much interest for a man who didn't know him. Benji turned slightly, surprised by the question. Maybe 3-4 miles east. Red Chevy. Left it off the service road when it started hissing. Alone? Lucien pressed. Benji hesitated. Yeah. Why? Lucien's smile thinned further. Just curious. Lot of people disappear out here. That wasn't a statement. It was a warning. The boy paled a fraction. Ghost stepped forward. Not a growl, not a bark. Just a silent placement of his body between Lucien and the boy. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken it aloud. Not this one. Not here. Eleanor felt it deep in her chest, that primal certainty again. The same kind she'd felt walking into a minefield years ago, when every bone in her body screamed left, not right, and she'd listened, because those who didn't listen didn't get a second chance. She looked at Lucien then, really looked. At the way his left hand never strayed far from his hip. At the way his shoes bore no dust, even after hours in the desert. At the rigid discipline in his posture military, or something worse. Then her eyes flicked to Benji, still standing awkwardly near the entrance, sweat starting to bead at his temple, and she made her decision. Not loud, not showy, but irrevocable. She walked around the counter and picked up a napkin holder, pretending to rearrange it near Benji's side. As she did, she leaned close enough for only him to hear. Sit at booth 3, she whispered. Back against the window. Don't turn your head, and no matter what you hear, stay put. Benji didn't argue. Something in her tone, firm but maternal, bypassed his defenses. He moved as instructed, sitting slowly, pretending to adjust his backpack like he hadn't just been given a direct order in a battlefield cafe. Lucien watched it all. His fingers resumed tapping, just once. Tap. 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 Ghost turned his head sharply. Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she walked slowly back toward the kitchen, toward the drawer she hadn't touched in 2 years, the one Mason built into the wall with a false bottom. Inside, there wasn't a weapon. Not in the way most would think. Inside was a worn notebook with 3 symbols carved into the leather cover. The strike, the signal, the pack. Mason's field journal. She took it out and tucked it into her apron. Lucien turned to glance toward the SUV outside again. His jaw clenched barely, but Ghost saw it. Shade saw it. And now Eleanor saw it too. The man was waiting for something. Or someone. Benji took a sip of his water, keeping his eyes down. The clock ticked behind the counter. Outside, in the heat shimmer beyond the glass, the wind picked up. Dust curled like old paper lifting from a forgotten story. And then, Eleanor did the one thing Lucien hadn't expected. She smiled. Not warmly, not falsely. Just enough to say, I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. It came like the crack of flint in a cave. A single bark. Not loud, not frantic. Just sharp, clear as a glass, shattering in an empty chapel. Echo stood still after it, ears high, chest rising. One paw slightly lifted. His eyes locked on the SUV across the lot, where desert heat danced in front of the tinted windows like a mirage built to lie. That bark meant something, and every soul in that diner felt it. Ghost's ears flicked. Shade's spine stiffened like a pulled wire. Without a sound, the The two older dogs rose from their places as if activated by an invisible command. Not rushing, not growling, just rising together. Eleanor had heard that sound before, years ago, in another life. Standing in a combat tent in Kandahar, she'd watched a Belgian Malinois issue that same exact bark before lunging at a man who'd smiled too wide, who'd reached too fast, who'd been hiding a second trigger behind his back. The dog had saved 3 soldiers, Mason among them. She hadn't forgotten the sound, and she didn't forget it now. Behind the counter, her hand hovered inches above the old landline phone. Not grabbing it. Not yet. Just breathing near it, her fingers lightly curved, like a pianist waiting for the downbeat. The bark still echoed in her bones. Echo himself had returned to stillness, as if the sound had cost him something. He didn't look back for approval. He didn't need to. Ghost had already positioned himself by the exit door, body angled between the window and the lot outside. Shade took up a post closer to Lucien, just 2 booths away now. And Lucien hadn't moved, but his fingers no longer tapped. Eleanor's eyes met his. For the first time since he entered, he looked curious. But underneath that, something colder stirred. He was weighing options, calculating. Benji, across the room, slowly lowered his water glass. He wasn't sure what had changed, but he felt it. That thickening of air before lightning strikes. That hush before a child cries. His fingers tightened around the glass. "What just happened?" he mouthed. Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer to the phone. Just a half inch. Lucien's head tilted slightly, his eyes tracking her movement, not the phone, but her muscles, her posture. Shade let out a slow, low exhale. Ghost didn't blink. Echo's tail barely twitched. Outside, the wind seemed to pause, and then came the creak, not from a voice or a movement inside, but from the SUV. A faint metallic sound barely audible, unless you were listening for it. Unless you were a dog whose entire being was tuned to threat and rhythm and breath. A latch, slowly unhooking. A mistake. Echo turned his head 1 notch. Lucien's eyes darted toward the window. The air snapped like a rope pulled taut. Eleanor's fingers reached the receiver. Lucien stood, slowly. Benji gasped. Ghost stepped forward. Then Shade. Then tap, tap, tap. Not from Lucien, from Ghost. 3 lines scratched on the floor with a claw. Just once straight, fast, clear. The same signal from outside. SOS. That was the moment Eleanor touched the phone. "Sheriff Vega," she whispered, voice barely above air. "It's Eleanor." A pause on the other end. Then a voice like steady gravel. "You need me?" "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Now, is it the dogs?" "They're already in position. 10 minutes." And then she hung up. Lucien was watching her openly now. No more smiles. No more performance. "What exactly are you planning, Mrs. Shaw?" His voice was velvet, draped over a blade. "I'm not planning anything," she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was tired, like someone who'd seen too many lies to care for one more. "Then why the phone?" "Just calling in a favor." Benji stood now, not moving away, just upright, alert, unsure of whose side he was even on, but knowing the ground was shifting beneath all of them. Lucien stepped away from his booth. His shoes didn't squeak. They never did. And then, without warning, Echo stepped in front of him. A small growl, not deep, not threatening, just a line in the sand. Lucien stopped. He looked at Echo, then Ghost, then Shade, realizing something far too late. They weren't just strays. They were a unit. A pack. His lips curled, finally dropping the mask. "Well," he said, "this just got interesting." Eleanor didn't move, didn't breathe, because somewhere inside that SUV, behind those tinted windows, was a man, bound, blinking, silently pleading. And now the dogs had spoken. Now the humans had to choose. Ghost was gone before the door even made a sound. Eleanor hadn't seen him move, just a blur of gray and muscle. a whisper of fur sliding past the booths and out through the front entrance like smoke disappearing into brush. The bell above the door didn't jingle, not even once. By the time her eyes adjusted to the harsh desert light, he had already vanished. No bark, no call, just silence and a shift in the air, like something primal had left the room. Eleanor walked to the window, just behind the pie display, and pressed her fingers gently to the glass. The heat outside bent the horizon into waves, warping the old pump station, the rusted road signs. But Ghost wasn't anywhere to be seen. Not on the gravel, not near the SUV, not even in the shadows beneath the Joshua trees. Gone. And yet, she knew exactly where he was. He was the oldest of the three, not by years, but by scars. The one who moved like wind through barbed wire, eyes lined with knowledge he never asked for. Ghost didn't bark unless it was needed. He didn't growl unless death was near. He didn't run. He disappeared. And when he did, it meant one thing. They were preparing for engagement. Inside the diner, Shade moved next. The darker dog, leaner and more coiled than the rest, slipped from under the bar stools and padded toward the back hallway without looking back. His head low, eyes sweeping side to side, controlled. Quiet, calculating. No one dared stop him. Benji stepped back into the booth, heart pounding. Lucian's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of wary calculation. He understood something now, something dangerous. Shade passed by the restroom hallway, then turned at the back door, nose briefly sniffing the cracks of the threshold. He paused for less than a breath, then disappeared into the back alley. Echo, the youngest, stayed just 2 steps behind Eleanor. He looked up at her now, uncertain. Not frightened, just waiting for a cue he hadn't been trained to recognize from a human like her. But his tail was stiff, his ears pulled slightly back. He was learning her rhythm the way she was learning theirs. "You're staying," she whispered. Echo blinked once, then turned and walked toward the front window, taking a slow seat by the corner booth, where he could watch both Lucian and the front lot. 3 dogs, 3 angles, 1 perimeter. Outside, the sun had begun to tilt westward, throwing longer shadows across the gravel lot. A raven landed briefly on the diner sign, squawked once, then took off again into the nothing. Eleanor stepped out from behind the counter, heart pacing against her ribs. She unlocked the back door with slow fingers, easing it open just enough to feel the dry air curl around her ankles. The alley behind was empty quiet except for the buzz of an old condenser unit and the soft scrape of wind through trash. But she could smell it now. Dust, sweat, oil. Someone had been back here. She stepped out carefully, scanning. Then she saw him. Shade, tucked behind the side of the building, motionless in a patch of scrub. Only his head turned toward her, just a small tilt, just enough to acknowledge. Then, eyes returning to the SUV. Watching, waiting. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Inside the diner, Echo shifted again. Not fidgeting, just aligning. And somewhere out beyond the horizon, in a small dip between desert brush and forgotten tire tracks, Ghost was watching it all from above, forming a triangle, covering every point. Lucian, back inside, adjusted his cuffs slowly, eyes bouncing from Echo to the front door. He was calculating, always calculating, but even he had begun to sense it now. He wasn't in control anymore. Eleanor returned inside, the screen door slapping gently behind her. Benji leaned forward, whispering, "What's happening?" "They're setting a perimeter," she said. "For what?" She looked at him. Really looked. Then back at Lucian. And finally at the phone, which now sat off the hook, its wires stretched across the counter like a fuse waiting for spark. "For whatever's coming," she said softly. It happened faster than breath. Lucian rose from the booth like a man walking out of church, calm, composed, too smooth, too silent. His coat barely shifted as he stepped toward the glass door of the diner, one polished shoe after another on the faded linoleum. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She felt it before she saw it. The way Ghost's absence thickened the air. The way Echo sat tense but low eyes following Lucian, not blinking. Lucian's fingers brushed against his hip, then slipped under his coat. "No," Eleanor whispered under her breath. But it was already happening. The sun outside glared against the diner's door as Lucian pushed it open. It swung wide. bell jingling with a false cheer. He stepped out onto the porch like a man stepping into destiny, hand now fully beneath his jacket. And then the shine. Steel flashed in the sun. A gun, not just carried, but drawn with practiced speed. No hesitation, no warning. In the very same breath Echo launched. There was no bark, no growl. Just a streak of tan and black muscle tearing across the diner floor, through the swinging door, teeth bared and body low like a bullet loosed from something older than war. Lucian turned his head too slow. Echo collided with him mid-step. The gun fired once. A scream ripped the air. Then blood. It sprayed against the edge of the doorframe, misting the heat-shimmering air. Lucian went down hard, back-slamming against the gravel. Echo was on him before the second shot could line up, snarling. Paws planted to the man's chest, jaws around his wrist. The pistol clattered to the ground. Eleanor moved instinctively, hand reaching under the counter. But she didn't grab a weapon. She grabbed the radio. Shots fired. She breathed into it, barely hearing herself. Echo's on him, shots fired. Ember. The response was static and shouting. Vega's voice breaking through. Hold! Hold position! We're almost there! Outside, Echo held. Lucian writhed beneath him, teeth gritted, trying to twist his arm free, but the dog's grip didn't budge. Blood seeped between Echo's jaws, dripping in rivulets across Lucian's tailored shirt. The man's hand, still holding the trigger, trembled, trying to angle the barrel back. Then came the sound of another body. Not a dog. Bravo. Big, solid, all bone and fury. The fourth dog had come from nowhere. Eleanor didn't know when he arrived. No one had seen him, no collar, no warning, no leash, just flesh and dust and instinct. Bravo struck like a storm. He pinned Lucian's legs down. One paw across the thighs. The other, steady. He didn't bite. He didn't need to. His weight alone immobilized the man, pressing his back deeper into the gravel, pinning him beneath the weight of something that could not be reasoned with. Lucian's eyes were wild now, panic replacing calculation. His free arm thrashed. Get it off! Get it off me! But the words were lost in Echo's growl. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, knees weak but spine upright. She saw the whole scene. Lucian, blood pouring from his right forearm. Echo steady, trembling from adrenaline but still locked on target. Bravo silent, eyes locked, a sentinel. And the gun gleaming in the dust, just inches out of reach. Inside the SUV, something moved behind the dark glass. Then a hand, small, shaking, pressed against the window. A child, alive, and watching. Eleanor's heart shattered and reformed in the same moment. That was why they came. Not vengeance, not instinct, rescue. The screen door creaked again behind her. Shade emerged from the side of the diner, low and fast. He didn't engage, just flanked the rear of the SUV, tail stiff, eyes locked on the back hatch. Waiting. Lucian groaned, coughing blood into the dust. You don't understand, he gasped, voice broken. You don't know what this is, what I am. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice low, but steel-wrapped. Number, but they do. And Echo, let go. Not all the way, just enough to remove the gun from Lucian's control. He stepped back, still growling, as Lucian's wrist dropped limp against the gravel crimson, soaking his cuff-like ink on a death warrant. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder now. Backup was coming. Sheriff Vega would see this. The dogs had done their part, and Eleanor had listened. She looked at Echo, his young body shaking with the adrenaline of that first real fight, and saw not just instinct or training, but choice. He had made the decision, and it had saved them all. The air had settled into a strange kind of stillness, the kind that comes after lightning strikes but before the thunder remembers to roll. Lucian lay groaning in the gravel, his blood seeping into the soil like a confession. Echo kept his distance, but remained coiled. One eye on the twitching hand, the other on the door of the SUV. Bravo hadn't moved. He loomed like a question that had already answered itself. But it was Ghost who made the next move. From the scrub line, he emerged, not a sound, not a leaf disturbed, just a shape materializing from the edge of dusk, his coat dusted with red soil. Eyes locked on the black SUV like he'd seen it in a dream. He didn't growl. He didn't charge. He walked. One paw in front of the other, quiet as memory. Then he stopped at the rear passenger door, his head tilted, ears twitching. And then a single bark. Sharp, not warning, not command. Signal. Eleanor heard it from the porch. She was still clutching the radio, Vega's voice echoing faintly from the other end. Units are 2 minutes out. Secure the scene. Eleanor, talk to me. But her feet were already moving. Down the stairs, across the gravel, past Lucien's ruined arrogance. She followed Ghost like gravity follows mass. The SUV sat quiet, its engine long cooled, the tinted windows refusing to give up their secrets. But Ghost didn't move. He just stood there, nose almost brushing the glass, tail stiff, eyes unwavering. Eleanor stepped beside him, and then she saw it. A flash, just a glimmer. Movement behind the tent. She leaned in, heart in her throat. The window was dirty, but not too dirty. And there it was again. A blink, then 3 more. Deliberate. 3 times. Blink, 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 pause. Then again. Blink, blink, blink. Eleanor's throat closed. Her hand went to her mouth, not in shock, but in memory. 3 taps. The same signal. The one her husband used to teach in the academy. The one he showed her over breakfast and through jokes and while cleaning dishes after their last Christmas together. If you're ever taken, no matter how broken, blink 3 times. Someone will see. Her eyes stung. Ghost barked again. Not loud, just enough. Inside, the figure shifted closer. The window fogged slightly with his breath. Just enough to make out a man's face. Gaunt, bruised. A length of duct tape sealed his mouth, smeared at one end with dried blood. His eyes sunken, but burning. She stepped back, hand trembling as she reached for the door handle. It didn't budge. Locked. Ghost turned to her, gave the faintest huff, then pressed his paw against the bottom of the door. He knew too. He was showing her. This wasn't just any man. Eleanor looked again through the fog glass, forcing herself to focus through the mess of trauma and adrenaline and disbelief. That jawline, that patch of scar under his left eye, the faint tan line where dog tags should have been. And then his hand lifted, slow, shaky. He pressed his fingers to the window, 3 of them, held high. Eleanor whispered, "You're military." The man blinked again, this time hard, twice in succession. Yes. Then a slow shake of the head. Not no, not wrong, warning. Ghost shifted, his tail lowering, body pressing close to the door as if shielding it. The man behind the glass moved again, and Eleanor saw something flash below the seat wires. Thin, coiled, and strapped to his legs. Not a passenger, not a kidnappee, a trap. Her breath caught. Her knees wanted to give, but she didn't step back. Instead, she met the man's eyes again and said quietly, "We're going to get you out." Another blink. Ghost turned sharply toward the tree line, then toward the road. He was calculating something. And Eleanor understood. There wasn't much time. Sirens now louder, closer. She raised the radio. "Sheriff Vega, we have a live hostage in the SUV military background. Possible explosive device strapped to legs. I repeat, this is a setup. Officer safety advised. Dogs confirm threat. Copy that. Tactical en route. Eleanor get clear." But she didn't move. Neither did Ghost. And neither did the man in the SUV, Daniel Cross. Because sometimes, stillness was the only thing keeping the whole world from cracking open. The first squad car came in hot tires spitting gravel, red and blue strobes spinning against the diner's aging neon sign. Then another. Then 2 more. Sirens died one by one, like candles snuffed in reverence. But the tension in the air didn't fade. It thickened. From the driver's side of the lead cruiser stepped Sheriff Alondra Vega, hat low, jaw set like granite. Eyes scanning before her boots even touched the dirt. She didn't speak right away. She didn't have to. Her presence was the command. Behind her, deputies fanned out with quiet precision, rifles drawn but held low. Every movement was rehearsed, tight, controlled. These weren't rookies. These were Vega's hand-picked few, the kind who followed orders but trusted instinct when orders weren't enough. And in that moment, the dogs moved with them. Not as threats, not as targets, but as something older than protocol, something born of shared purpose. Ghost stepped back from the SUV, tail low, stance neutral, then gave Vega a single look like passing the baton. Echo circled wide toward the edge of the perimeter, flanking without command. Shade, ever watchful, stood guard over Lucien's barely conscious body. Low growl vibrating his ribs when a deputy approached too fast. "Hold," Eleanor warned softly from behind him. The deputy froze. Shade blinked, then looked away. Vega finally reached the SUV. "Eleanor," she said, voice calm, but layered with everything unspoken. "There's a man inside. Name's Daniel Cross. Tied down, duct-taped, possibly wired." He blinked in SOS. "Vega notat vonse. Processing. Docs confirm." They didn't just confirm, Eleanor's voice cracked. "They led me here." The sheriff looked toward Ghost, who now sat like a sphinx in the dirt, watching the SUV with the same focus he'd give a ticking clock. "Jesus," Vega muttered, then keyed her shoulder radio. "Tactical stabilize the SUV. Passenger side approach only. Bomb squad pre-stage but do not breach. I want Cross out alive." A chorus of clicks and confirmations followed. But Eleanor wasn't waiting. She stepped past Vega. "Eleanor." "I can reach him," she said. "The locks are manual. He's alert. He's scared, but he's holding it together. Protocol says we wait." Eleanor turned, and something in her eyes, something carved from grief and rebuilt in trust, stopped the sheriff mid-sentence. "These dogs knew before we did. They were trained for something none of us understand yet. And that man inside? He doesn't have time for a rule book." Ghost stood then. Just once. Then sat again. Vega looked at him. Then at Eleanor. Then stepped aside. "Go. But I want two on your flank." Eleanor nodded. Echo trotted forward, taking her right. A young deputy named Mendez took the left. Ghost followed 3 steps behind, silent as breath. They reached the passenger side. Eleanor tried the handle. Locked. Daniel stared at her through the tinted glass, eyes wide with disbelief, then hope. She mouthed, "We're getting you out." From her back pocket, she pulled something wrapped in an old handkerchief, a folding knife, worn smooth at the edges. She unfolded it gently. It had belonged to her husband, Deputy Mark Reyes. He used to carve their initials into picnic tables with it, clean fish with it on weekend trips, cut away a seatbelt once to save a boy drowning in a flipped pickup. The steel still held a shine. She tapped the glass with her knuckles. "Cover your eyes," she mouthed, then smashed the window with the butt of the knife. The tempered glass spiderwebbed, cracked, and gave way. A deputy helped clear the edges, gloved and quick. Eleanor reached in. The duct tape across Daniel's mouth came first. He gasped, painful, hoarse. "Thursday, Shh," she whispered. "Don't talk yet." She moved quickly, careful not to jar the wires looped around his thighs. Echo was already sniffing the undercarriage, scanning for trip mechanisms. One of the tactical officers radioed in. "No external trigger. Could be pressure." Eleanor lowered herself into the vehicle, knees cracking against the floorboard. Daniel flinched. "I'm going to cut the zip ties. Then I'm going to move the wire from your legs. Nod if you understand." He nodded. The blade sliced once, twice, clean through the restraints. His arms fell limp. Then the wire. Her breath was shallow, measured. One slip. But it came free. No tension. Just looped. Decoy? Disarmed? Or worse still, live? She didn't have time to ask. "Help me get him out," she said to the deputy. They pulled him gently from the car. Ghost backed up to allow room. Echo paced, scanning the tree line. Then came the sigh, the kind that breaks through a body after surviving a moment it didn't believe it could. Daniel's knees buckled, but Eleanor caught him. "I thought," he rasped. "I know," she said. "But you're here. You're safe." He looked at Ghost, then at Echo. "They found me." She nodded. They always do. Behind them, Sheriff Vega watched it all unfold. No chaos. No wasted movement. Only the silent rhythm of trained creatures and humans who remembered how to listen. Daniel Cross lay crumpled on the gravel, the side of his face pressed to the cool earth, as if trying to remember what gravity felt like. Dust clung to his skin. Blood crusted at the corner of his mouth, dried in the creases of his jaw. He didn't move, Didn't speak, just breathed in sharp, uneven stabs, like someone who'd forgotten how. The world around him slowed. Boots scuffed. Radios crackled. Deputies murmured quietly, respectfully. None dared approach just yet. Not while the dog stood close, forming a circle tighter than any perimeter tape. Not while Eleanor knelt beside him with her hand gently on his back. Not pressing, just present. Then, his chest rose deeper, not a gasp, but a breath that dragged every fragment of agony up with it and forced it into the air. His lungs shuddered, caught, held, then released. And with that breath came a sound, not a word. Not yet, but something halfway between a sob and a sigh. One tear slipped free from the corner of Daniel's right eye, tracing a jagged path down the dust of his cheek, like water carving through years of silence. Eleanor saw it. She didn't flinch. She just whispered, "You're safe now." Her voice didn't rise above the wind, didn't try to convince. It simply was. Daniel blinked hard, as if trying to return to a body that had been someone else's for too long. His lips parted. No words came, but then a wet touch at his hand. It was Echo. The German shepherd lowered his head with a reverence that felt holy. Not sniffing, not nudging. Just a slow, deliberate lick across Daniel's bruised knuckles. Blood, salt, and memory. Daniel startled, then froze. His eyes darted to the dog. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, man and animal, both battered by something too large to name. Then Echo did it again. A second lick, slower this time, then rested his chin gently across Daniel's forearm, not as a gesture of possession, but as a signal. "You're back." Daniel's voice cracked like old wood. "I thought no one—" He couldn't finish it. Eleanor gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say it yet," she said. "You don't have to say anything." But his eyes met hers, wide with something deeper than fear recognition. Not of her, but of the moment, of what it meant to survive. And maybe to be allowed to survive. The wind stirred dry leaves across the diner's porch. Inside, someone finally turned off the radio that had been humming low since dawn. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full, weighted, sacred. Sheriff Vega approached then, footsteps soft. She crouched a few feet away, not intruding. "He's dehydrated. Shock. Probably hasn't eaten in days," she said gently, almost to Eleanor more than to him. "Let's get the medics in." Daniel's hand twitched, almost like he was reaching for something that wasn't there. "No stretcher," Eleanor said quietly. "Not yet. Give him a moment." Vega looked to Echo, then Ghost and Shade still keeping close watch. She nodded. 5 minutes. The deputies backed off. Daniel curled slightly, as if the release of tension had left nothing but bone. Then, another breath. Smoother this time. Not calm, but steady. His eyes flicked toward the SUV, the broken glass, the blood on the seats, the shadows left behind. "I wasn't supposed to make it out," he murmured. Eleanor heard it. She knelt closer, adjusting her knees in the gravel. "You weren't supposed to die there, either." Daniel let out a strangled laugh, more air than sound. His hand found the edge of Echo's ruff, fingers splaying gently, then tightening like he didn't trust it was real. "I saw one of them watching, recording. I think they wanted the body to be found, make it look like an overdose." His voice faltered. Eleanor's eyes softened, but her jaw tightened. "We'll get to that," she said. "But not now." She unfolded her handkerchief, the same one she had wrapped the knife in, and dabbed at the blood near his temple. Her hands were steady, not clinical, not maternal, just kind. "You're safe now," she repeated, more to the part of him still trembling than to the words themselves. Daniel turned his head slightly and looked at her. "Who are you?" "Just someone who listens to dogs," she said with a tired smile. From behind her, Ghost stepped closer, his massive body casting shade across them both. He didn't bark, didn't posture, he just sat. And for the first time since the rescue, Daniel closed his eyes, but not in fear, not in escape, in trust. The light changed as noon approached. Shadows drew sharper lines across the gravel lot behind the diner. The wind picked up a dry sweep through mesquite and dust, lifting the scent of iron and adrenaline still clinging to the air. Sheriff Alondra Vega stood near the SUV, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the tree line like she didn't trust the stillness. She wasn't wrong. Across the narrow back fence that edged the diner's property, Deputy Graciano raised a hand half signal, half warning. He'd been walking a perimeter sweep when his K9, a lean, brindle Malinois named Duke, had suddenly stiffened and gone into full alert. Graciano knew better than to shout. He followed Duke's nose into the scrub, heart thudding. About 20 feet into the tree line, Duke stopped, one paw raised mid-step, head turned slightly sideways. Graciano's hand dropped instinctively to his sidearm, but he didn't draw. A breath broke the silence. Then another. There was someone else here. Behind a thick palmetto bush, partially hidden by the remains of a rusted barbed wire fence, sat a man. Legs drawn in, hands loose at his sides. No struggle, no fleeing. He was waiting, watching. The man looked up as Graciano stepped closer, and his eyes, dark, flat, almost too still, met his without flinching. "On your feet," Graciano said. The man didn't move, but Duke growled low, chest vibrating. Finally, the stranger rose. He was wiry, early 42nd, weather-worn skin, gray hoodie soaked in sweat at the collar. His hands rose slowly, palms out, not defiant, just calculated. "You found me faster than I thought," he muttered. "Turn around." The man did, but not before casting a final glance back toward the diner. Graciano clicked the radio clipped to his vest. "Sheriff code 10 to 15. We've got a second male in custody. Hiding northeast quadrant. Sending location now." Back at the diner, Vega's shoulders tensed. Eleanor, still kneeling beside Daniel, looked up. "A second?" she asked, almost not believing. Vega nodded. Someone else was watching. Daniel stirred weakly, his voice like gravel. "Not just watching. He was directing." They all turned toward him. Vega barked orders into her radio. The scene shifted fast, deputies moved, paramedics rerouted. But the world had already changed before the dust even settled. 20 minutes later, the man was seated in the back of a patrol cruiser, cuffed, lips tight as stitches. He hadn't said a word since being detained, but his presence alone sent a strange, cold tension through the air. Not rage, not remorse. Sheriff Vega reviewed the prints, voice low as she showed the screen to Eleanor. "Name is Daryl Stone. Alias, Rafe Simmons. He's in the Bureau's Human Trafficking Database Tier 2 priority. Interstate transport suspected. 6 states flagged." Eleanor blinked slowly, the words sinking in like rain into dry earth. "Human trafficking?" she repeated. Vega nodded grimly. "Cross, state smuggling. Usually targets high-risk youth. Runaways, homeless, soldiers in transition, and..." Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, still receiving fluids under Echo's watchful eye. "He fits!" Inside the diner, people were starting to gather. Whispers fluttered like nervous moths. Who was that man in the SUV? Why were the dogs so aggressive? What's happening to our town? Someone tried to snap a photo from across the parking lot before being ushered away. Others watched from behind their windshields, engines still running, afraid to leave. Even the cook stood frozen in the doorway, apron in hand, expression pale. The hush before had shifted to a different silence, one that knew the shape of fear. Vega rubbed her temple. "We're calling in the state feds. Maybe the Bureau." Eleanor stared at the cruiser. "Was he armed?" "No," Vega said. "Which means he was confident. Or worse, just here to watch the kill." Eleanor shivered. Not from cold, but because she knew men like that didn't move without orders, didn't wait unless something was coming. She turned to Echo, who hadn't moved from Daniel's side. "Did you know there were 2? Echo's ears flicked, but he didn't respond. Dogs don't lie. They just choose when to speak. From the back seat of the cruiser, Daryl Stone looked up again, his eyes meeting Eleanor's through the tinted glass. A slight smirk curled at the edge of his mouth. It wasn't defiance. It was a message. Vega stepped in front of her, blocking the view. "Don't give him the satisfaction," she said gently. Eleanor nodded but didn't look away, because something in that man's face told her the danger wasn't over. It had just been delayed. The air had stilled again. Not from peace, but from pause. That strange moment after violence, when the earth seems to hold its breath. waiting to see what will rise from the ashes. Eleanor stood near the edge of the lot, hands wrung in front of her apron, eyes flicking between Daniel Cross, now stabilized, and breathing with the help of paramedics and the SUV that had brought him here like a coffin on wheels. Behind her, the door of the cruiser slammed shut. Sheriff Vega finished briefing the incoming state investigator over the radio, her voice even but laced with grit. Deputies marked off the area with weathered tape. A camera clicked somewhere behind the line. But Eleanor wasn't listening, because Ghost had just returned. No sound, no announcement, just his quiet presence at her side appearing like a memory called back from the dark. He sat, looked up at her, and waited. It was only when her breath softened, when her shoulders fell half an inch, and her fingers unclenched from the fabric of her apron that Ghost laid down. Chest to the ground, head resting on his paws, eyes still open, watching. "Good boy," Eleanor whispered, bending slightly to press the back of her hand to his fur. It was warm, steady, real. They were safe for now, but not done. Across the lot, Bravo, the youngest of the three, Canine second, was circling the SUV again, his steps quick, not frantic, but intentional. Nose to metal, tail straight like an antenna catching signals from something unseen. Eleanor watched him with narrowing eyes. "Shade already cleared it," Vega said behind her, crossing her arms. "Dogs don't double-check," Eleanor murmured. "Not unless they missed something the first time, or something new showed up." Bravo froze, one paw on the back passenger fender. Then he let out a single huff, not a bark, not a growl. A breath with weight in it. He pawed at the rear bumper. Once, twice, then again. "Third time today," Eleanor muttered. "What is it with the number 3? Vega asked, stepping forward. Eleanor knelt beside Bravo and looked closer. Her hands ran under the wheel well, along the inside edge of the bumper, and then she found it. A seam, too precise for factory design, hidden beneath the grime and road dust. She pressed a fingernail into the groove, then reached for her key ring and used the sharp tip to work the panel loose. With a quiet snap, a thin section of the SUV's rear shell fell open. Vega crouched beside her as Eleanor pulled out what was inside. A small canvas pouch, zipped, heavier than it looked. She opened it slowly, her gut already knowing this wasn't drugs or weapons. Inside, asterisk. A bundle of crisp $100 bills wrapped in elastic. Asterisk, 6 laminated ID cards, all different names, all different faces. None matching the driver or the second man. Asterisk. A plain envelope, unsealed, its contents already damp from heat and pressure. Eleanor unfolded the paper. Typed neatly, in sterile black ink, was a list of names. 3 of them stood out immediately. Daniel Cross, Elias Morrow, Maya Vasquez. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read them again. "These are targets," she said, voice hoarse. Vega took the list. "Or cargo." A long silence stretched between them. Ghost shifted beside her. His ears twitched, but he didn't move. Bravo stayed by the bumper, alert but calm, as if the act of discovery had grounded something ancient inside him. They weren't just transporting Daniel, Eleanor said quietly. They were sorting people, like inventory. Vega's jaw clenched. State Bureau's going to want this, and the feds will try to bury it. Eleanor didn't answer. She just reached back into the pouch. Another thin card was wedged into the lining. This one, different plastic, not laminated. An access badge, military grade. High clearance. She turned it over. The name read, Lieutenant Cole. Austin Drexler. Vega exhaled sharply. "No way. Drexler's been on leave for months. They said he went dark. Or was told to." Eleanor's throat tightened. Her mind drifted to her late husband, teaching her how to read a scene, not by what you saw, but by what didn't belong. A soldier. A sealed SUV. Names like ghosts. She looked down at Ghost, who had now sat up again, gaze fixed on the card in her hand. "Do you know that name?" she whispered almost to herself. Ghost didn't move, but his body grew still, not tense, not afraid, still like stone that remembers thunder. Eleanor swallowed. "He does." Vega stood slowly. "I'll send this in through a secure channel. No chatter. We go dark until we know what this is." As she walked away, Eleanor stared at the list again. Daniel Cross, Elias Morrow, Maya Vasquez, and 5 others with no faces. Just codes, just numbers. Ghost leaned closer, his nose brushing lightly against her knee. She looked at him and whispered the only truth she could manage. Dogs never lie. And neither did instinct, not when it came with teeth and silence. The hum of the overhead fan filled the room like background static, low, unchanging, almost hypnotic. Afternoon sunlight filtered in through dusty blinds, striping the linoleum floor with soft gold and long shadow. The sheriff's office hadn't changed much since Eleanor last stood here, not since the funeral. But today, she wasn't alone. Daniel Cross sat in the chair across from Sheriff Alondra Vega's desk, a clean notepad in front of him. His left hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the pen. He'd tried speaking earlier only to produce a hoarse rasp that ended in a cough and a wince. They didn't ask again. They gave him space, water, quiet. And now, with his breathing steadier and his mind beginning to untangle from shock, he began to write, one word at a time. Eleanor stood in the corner, arms crossed loosely, Ghost lying at her feet. Shade was posted just outside the door. Bravo sat beside Daniel, tail thumping once when the man's hand brushed his fur, then settling again into stillness. Sheriff Vega didn't interrupt. She watched. Daniel paused after a few lines, head bowed. His fingers moved like they were remembering how to hold a rifle or how to pray. Then he slid the notepad across the desk. Vega picked it up. Her eyes scanned the page. She read slowly, clearly, no dramatics, just truth spoken aloud for the first time since the rescue. 3 German shepherds saved me. I thought I was dead. The room fell silent. The fan kept spinning overhead. A truck passed by outside, engine rattling like an old smoker's cough, but it felt distant. The weight of Daniel's sentence pressed down on the walls like fog. Vega cleared her throat and read the next line. The older one, gray around the muzzle, he found me first. I remember his eyes. They didn't blink. Ghost looked up then, just once, then settled again. Eleanor stepped forward slightly, her voice soft. That was Ghost. Daniel gave a barely perceptible nod. Vega continued reading. I don't know how long I'd been in the back of that SUV. Days, maybe. They kept me drugged. Not enough to knock me out, just enough to blur time, blur thought. But I heard things. She paused, her jaw clenched. Eleanor could see the old habits return to Vega's body posture straightening, mind shifting into law enforcement mode. But there was something else there too, something more personal. Anger, contained, focused. She read on. They were moving people, not just me. Kids, veterans, a woman they called the pilot. I think she was military. I think we were all part of something. Someone said my name had been on a list since last year. I don't know what for. Daniel reached out and tapped the bottom corner of the notepad. Vega looked. A final sentence, just beneath the rest. But I know this. Those dogs weren't just trained. They remembered. Eleanor stepped to the desk and gently placed her hand on the notepad, as if trying to absorb the weight of the words through her skin. That's what Echo used to do, she whispered. When Martin was alive, they worked search and recovery. Echo never forgot a scent, even years later. Daniel looked at her then. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. He reached again for the pen and scrawled a new word in the margin. Names. Vega leaned in. You remember more? He nodded slowly, then began to write again. The pen scratched softly on paper. A list began to form. First, Lieutenant Colonel Drexler. Then, N-74 field designation. Then 2 more. Elias Morrow, Maya Vasquez. He paused, shaking slightly, then wrote the last one. Project Shepherd. Vega whispered it aloud, like a prayer that hurt to say. Project Shepherd. Eleanor inhaled, quiet but sharp. Her hand found the edge of the desk for support. Martin mentioned that once, she said. Long ago. Just a name in a conversation he ended too fast. Ghost stirred again. Vega placed the paper down gently. I'll contact interagency, she said, voice low. Off the books at first. If what he's saying lines up with what we found in that SUV, someone's been building a ghost list. And the dogs, she looked to Ghost and Bravo, The dogs are remembering pieces of it. Daniel lifted the pen again. One last line. Whatever they did to us, the dogs weren't part of it. He underlined the last 4 words. Vega nodded slowly. Then she reached across the desk and folded the paper shut, not to hide it, but to hold it, to protect it. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're safe now." Daniel's chest rose and fell with something close to relief. His eyes misted. He didn't cry, but a single tear slid down one cheek anyway. Echo, who had entered silently behind them, walked over and sat by Daniel's side. The soldier looked down. The dog's tongue brushed gently over his knuckles, soft, careful, almost reverent. "I thought I was dead," Daniel rasped. His voice was barely there, but it was real. And then Eleanor leaned down, placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, and whispered back, "You were found." The Luna County Courthouse hadn't seen this much foot traffic since the wildfire hearings back in 2002. But this morning, the steps were crowded before the sun had fully cleared the ridgeline. Reporters pressed microphones toward the locked wooden doors. Locals whispered behind steaming paper cups of diner coffee. Cell phones were raised high-angled to catch the faces of every deputy, every witness, every breath of drama that might unfold. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Judge Marley, stoic and razor-eyed in his 8th decade, sat beneath the state seal, tapping a thick wooden pen against his open file. His robe was clean but creased, like it hadn't moved from its hanger in years. But this case stirred even him. Sheriff Vega stood to one side near the bailiff, arms crossed. Her expression held no welcome for the cameras. On the far bench, seated just beyond the brass rail, Eleanor Shaw waited. Her hands were folded tightly on her lap, one thumb rhythmically brushing the edge of her wedding ring. Echo laid her feet, calm, watching. Bravo, too, had been granted special permission to remain. The judge himself had overruled objections. If the dogs are part of the testimony, they will be part of the room. There was a strange reverence to the atmosphere, half civic duty, half something older, like the people had come not just for law, but for witness, for reckoning. A young woman in jeans and a puffy purple jacket held up her phone from the back row, whispering excitedly into the live stream. "Guys, I'm here. Yes, the case. The German Shepherds are literally at the front. That's Eleanor Shaw, the diner owner. Oh my God, they just laid down like angels." A murmur rippled forward. The clerk called the court to order. "All rise." Judge Marley didn't waste time. He leaned forward, looked over the half-glasses perched on his nose, and said, "Miss Shaw, you've been summoned today not as an expert in law, but in loyalty, and I want to hear your account directly. Begin when you're ready." Eleanor stood slowly. Her knees creaked more than she wanted them to. Echo rose with her, then lay back down the moment she stilled. He didn't need a command. He knew her breath. "I'm not trained for this, Your Honor," she said softly, voice steady but quiet. "I run a diner. I make eggs and coffee and tell regulars when they've had too much sugar." "Oh?" A gentle laugh flickered from the gallery. "But I've lived with these dogs," she continued, "and I watched them do something no training book can teach. I watched them choose." She looked down for a moment at Echo, then back up. "The day Lucien Drake walked into my diner, I didn't know who he was, but Ghost did, and so did Echo. Shade took the rear door, positioned himself without a signal. They didn't bark. They didn't growl. They just watched him. And they waited." Waited for what?" the judge asked, his voice like dry gravel. Eleanor swallowed. For truth to show itself. Gasps were audible now, murmurs swelling in pockets. She took a breath. When Drake stepped out toward that SUV, Echo barked once. Not from fear, not by accident. It was like a bell being struck. "And what followed?" Judge Marley asked, leaning forward. Eleanor didn't rush. Echo launched. Bravo followed. Drake never had a chance to draw fully. There was blood, screaming, but not a single bite landed where it shouldn't. They stopped him. And then Ghost. Ghost was already at the back door of that vehicle, barking like he'd found something sacred. The room quieted again. The live stream count ticked upward. 47,932 viewers. A man in the third row whispered to his daughter, "That's the same dog from the picture. The one that found the soldier." Marley glanced toward Sheriff Vega. "Sheriff, can you confirm that the dog's actions led directly to the recovery of Mr. Tutu? Cross? Vikanuttet." "Without hesitation, Your Honor. The dogs acted before we had probable cause. Without them, we'd have had no justification to intervene. Mr. Cross may not have survived another night in that vehicle." "Were the dogs acting under direct command?" "No," Eleanor said before Vega could answer. "They weren't." She stepped slightly forward, voice lowering. "They were remembering." A rustle moved through the gallery like wind through prairie grass. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was quiet, heavy. "Echo and Ghost used to work search and recovery with my late husband, Martin. I thought they were retired. But when they saw Daniel Cross through that glass, they remembered his scent, and they acted not as animals but as witnesses." Judge Marley didn't interrupt. A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek, not from grief, but from the weight of recognition. "These dogs knew," she whispered. "And they didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. That's not just instinct. That's memory." From the back, a man stood suddenly. Young, pale, reporter's badge on a lanyard. "Are you saying these dogs recognized a victim from years ago?" Eleanor looked at him. "I'm saying they never forgot." The court clerk moved to quiet the room, but Judge Marley lifted one hand. He stared at the dogs, at Eleanor, then said, "We may need a different kind of record for this case. One that remembers the heart as much as the law." Echo blinked, then rested his head on Eleanor's boot. Bravo, still by the bench, lifted his ears and stared at the door, as if waiting for something else, something unseen. Outside, the courthouse buzzed with reporters. But inside, for a few seconds, everything stilled. The kind of stillness that comes before change. The day was bright, in the way some October mornings are sunlight sharp and sincere, yet soft enough not to sting the eyes. Flags fluttered on the courthouse lawn, their shadows slicing across granite steps worn smooth by generations. Inside the foyer, the room hushed itself without command. Reporters had stopped asking questions. Locals stopped whispering. Even the air seemed to draw back as the side door creaked open. Daniel Cross entered. He wore his dress blues, pressed, clean, medals gleaming with muted grace across his chest, not worn for show, but out of memory. The kind of uniform you keep in a sealed garment bag in case someone you love doesn't come home, or in rare cases, when you do. His steps echoed on the tile. There was a cane in his left hand, but he walked with quiet dignity, pain tucked beneath the seams. His right arm, still stiff from injury, held a single white rose. The dogs were already seated. Bravo sat closest to the doors, alert and still. Shade flanked the far window. And Echo stood, not rigid, but waiting. His ears twitched once, then again, and then his body relaxed. He knew. Daniel's eyes never left the dog as he stepped forward. Not past, not over, toward. A few feet away, Daniel stopped, lowered his cane, lowered himself. Painfully, intentionally. Kneeling took time. It took breath. But when he rested one knee on the marble floor, he did so not as a soldier honoring rank, but as a man acknowledging the one thing that had not abandoned him. Echo didn't move. He simply stared, amber eyes, steady, filled with that stillness only dogs seem to possess, as if saying, "I remember too." Daniel placed the rose gently at Echo's front paws. And then, in a voice hushed by damage but stronger than it had been in weeks, he whispered, "You're my unit now." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, brimming. A woman near the doorway pressed a hand to her chest. An older man Vietnam vet, by the look of the pins on his jacket, quietly removed his cap. Echo leaned forward, just slightly, and pressed his forehead into Daniel's shoulder. Not a trick, not a command, just knowing. Daniel let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His good hand gently gripped Echo's ruff. "I thought they took everything from me," he whispered. "But they didn't take you." From the back of the room, Eleanor stood with her arms folded, not crossed defensively, but cradling the moment. Her gaze softened as tears welled up, but didn't fall. This wasn't grief. This was recognition. Sheriff Vega, standing by the courtroom doors, cleared her throat softly. But she didn't speak, didn't interrupt. She just let it happen. Some things, even law enforcement, must learn to bow to. A small boy, maybe 8, maybe 9, tugged on his mother's sleeve beside one of the gallery benches. "Mom," he whispered, "is that the dog from the video?" His mom nodded, tears in her own eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. That's the one who found the soldier, M." The boy turned back to watch, eyes wide, heart wide open. Daniel slowly rose again with help from Eleanor, who appeared at his side without sound. She offered a steadying hand, and he took it with the silent gratitude of someone who had spent too long alone. "I've been thinking," he said, voice rough, "about what comes next." Echo tilted his head slightly. Daniel looked around the room, then down again. "These dogs aren't done, and neither am I." Bravo barked once short, controlled. A sound of agreement. "I want to form a unit," Daniel continued. "Not military, not police, something in between. A team built around instinct, around bond, around trust." Eleanor blinked. "You mean like a task force?" Daniel smiled. "More like a sanctuary that can move." He paused. "A place where no one's left behind." From the far end of the corridor, a woman from the state's Victim Advocacy Board wiped her cheeks. "We'd fund that," she murmured aloud. "We'd back that in a heartbeat." "Emster." Someone else clapped. Then another. Soon the room was filled with soft, sincere applause, not thunderous, but reverent. The kind reserved for things you feel, not just witness. Echo barked once, the kind of bark that starts something. Daniel looked down at him. "You ready, boy?" The German shepherd didn't move. He didn't need to. Some answers are given without sound. The courthouse hall had thinned to soft echoes, reporters filing dispatches, deputies trading low words, Daniel clasping hands he never expected to shake. Outside, October light draped the sandstone steps in a bright hush that felt almost like forgiveness. That was when little Cassie Finley appeared. 8 years old, freckles flaring from sun and wonder, pink overalls dusty at the knees. She'd slipped free of her father Doug's watch just long enough to dart up the wide stairwell, clutching a roll of thick drawing paper against her chest. Cassie stopped at the top landing, boots too big thunking on polished stone, and looked around the vast space in awe. Echo spotted her first, his ears pricked, tail giving one tentative wag. The girl smiled wide, relieved, then threaded her way through grown-up legs and clipboard elbows until she stood in front of Eleanor and Daniel. "Mr. Cross," she piped, voice shy but steady. "I made you something." Daniel, still in his formal blues, bent carefully, metal ribbons catching a beam of light. "For me?" Cassie nodded so hard her ponytail bounced. She unrolled the paper with small, determined fingers. Colors bloomed in the unfurling, crayon yellows and desert oranges, a sky so blue it dared the courthouse ceiling to match. The picture showed 3 German shepherds, Ghost, Shade, and Echo, drawn tall and strong, their paws planted on copper-red earth. Behind them, a Marine knelt, rope binding his wrists, eyes lifted toward the dogs and to a bright sun edged with gold rays. Above everything Cassie had written, in careful block letters, one word: Guardians. Silence gathered again, deeper, richer. Doug, arriving breathless, took off his trucker cap and held it to his chest. Sheriff Vega's stern composure cracked into the barest ghost of a smile. Even Judge Marley paused on his way to chambers, cleared his throat and murmured, "Well now." Daniel brushed a thumb across the page. "This is perfect." His voice wavered, snagged on the simple truth a child could see. Cassie's brown eyes shone. "Daddy says pictures help people remember instead of just forgetting scary stuff." Daniel swallowed. "Your daddy's right. Eleanor crouched beside Cassie, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "You know what I see? I see courage all the kinds there are. Dog courage, soldier courage, and little girl with a crayon courage." Cassie giggled, cheeks flushing. Behind them, a county archivist named Maribel Ortiz stepped forward, badge lanyard swinging. "Pardon?" she said softly. "But City Council is looking for an image to headline the new Civic Hall. Something local, something true. May I?" She reached toward the drawing with reverent fingertips. Cassie looked up at Daniel first. He nodded. "Only if you hang it where everyone can see. Front lobby. Maribel promised. Under glass with a brass plate. She rolled the picture carefully and tucked it into a protective tube, an aid produced as if conjured. Papermet cylinder with a soft shh, the sound of memory being stored for safekeeping. Echo-nosed Cassie's hand. She giggled again and hugged his neck. Cameras flashed. Reporters whisper-shouted timestamps into phones. But in the middle of it, the courthouse felt smaller, like a kitchen on a winter morning when coffee percolates and the world waits kindly outside the door. The unveiling drew half the town. City Hall's newly painted atrium smelled of plaster dust and eucalyptus polish. Morning sun poured through the transom windows, catching on the glass frame mounted at eye level. Inside the frame, Cassie's drawing blazed with all its youthful certainty. The three dogs, the bound marine, the humorless desert, the shining word guardians. Beneath, a brass plaque read, "In honor of those who listen to the silent call, the bravest hearts may beat on four legs." Cassie, wearing a cleaner pair of pink overalls, held Eleanor's hand. Doug wiped his eyes with a sleeve the size of a flag. Sheriff Vega stood with Daniel and the dogs just beyond the rope line. Ghost sat statuesque, ears proud. Shade surveyed every corner, ever the sentinel. Echo lay at Daniel's boot, tail sweeping gently whenever Cassie looked his way. Councilwoman Lou gave a short speech about community and vigilance, her words echoing up the atrium vault. But it was Daniel's brief statement, still gravel-soft, yet unbroken, that stilled every breath. Art can tell the truth faster than reports or trials. This drawing is the first chapter written by a child, safeguarded by three dogs, and signed by every soul who refuses to look away. A tear slid down Cassie's cheek, not from sadness, but from the sheer, bright gravity of being seen. Eleanor knelt to wipe it with her thumb. "You did this," she whispered. Cassie sniffed. "They did." Eleanor looked at Ghost, Shade, and Echo. "Maybe we all did, together." And applause rose, soft, then swelling, carrying through the skylight and out into the desert morning, where the world was still dangerous, but, for this breath, felt held in good hands. Ghost lay down only when Eleanor's shoulders finally eased. Dogs, after all, never lie. After the interviews quieted and the cameras moved on, Eleanor and Daniel drove west of Tucson to a patch of forgotten ranch land, a place no one wanted. That made it perfect. They named it Bravo Shelter before the first nail was set, because the youngest dog had been the bravest, because the name sounded like applause. Daniel sketched plans on the hood of his truck, a long, sun-catching kennel wing, a central clinic room, and a back apartment where a tired Marine could sleep with the door unlocked again. Volunteers came, a trucker who'd seen the rescue, teens needing credit, retirees with time and stories. Cassie arrived with Doug, hauling lumber. Sheriff Vega sent 2 trustees to pour the slab. By the third weekend, the skeleton of a sanctuary rose against the desert sky. Ghost patrolled the fence at sunrise, teaching strays that boundaries could mean safety. Shade guarded the supply trailer with silent dignity. Echo followed Cassie, tail erasing as many brushstrokes as she painted, but every smear was a signature. By November, Bravo Shelter stood complete. The adobe-toned siding blended into the dusty hills. The entrance bore a reclaimed barn door, with 3 shepherds etched in steel above it. Inside, lavender and cedar masked any memory of fear. 12 kennel stalls, each with half doors, cots, and clean nameplates, waited for second chances. The clinic gleamed with repurposed equipment and dog-eared manuals from Daniel's medic days. Out on the community porch, dusk brought guitar chords, chili pots, and the slow realization that not all stories had to end in grief. A plaque by the door Cassie's script in bronze read, "For the lost, the loyal, and the ones who listen. 0600. Ghost circles the yard and rests his head on Eleanor's knee as she sips her coffee, counting the steady beat of 2 hearts that nearly didn't make it. 0700. Daniel limps from the apartment. Echo dances around his boots. Together they check supplies. Echo brings enthusiasm. Daniel brings steadiness. 0800. Shade supervises breakfast with a quiet presence that keeps order better than bark. 1000. Intake. Some days it's 1 trembling stray. Other days, a box of pups left at the gate. Eleanor kneels to each, gentle hands whispering safety. She remembers her own tremble from that diner night. 1,400 training drills. Echo shows off his patterns. When a shy dog named Stella completes her first recall, applause rings out like church bells. Shade barks once proud. Ghost watches with approval. 2,000 porch hour. Stars overhead. Eleanor soaks her feet. Cassie reads from a worn adventure book. Daniel oils hinges. Ghost dreams nearby, perhaps of desert highways long behind them. Each routine adds another brick to their healing. Eleanor begins humming again Mason's old boot camp tune. It used to hurt. Now it stitches. Ghost no longer follows her every step. He trusts her now. Stands guard at the gate at dawn, the clinic by day, and the porch by dusk. His duty no longer born of trauma, but trust. One night under apricot skies, Eleanor finally steps back from the shelter and sees it for what it is: not construction, but belonging. Built from rubble, memory, and names that no list could forget. Ghost, Shade, Echo, Cassie, Daniel, and the vow that no bark would go unheard again. Night falls quickly in Sonoran winter. That's Ghost's hour. He rises from the porch as the last headlights fade. No command, no leash, just instinct. He patrols east fence to south line, step by steady step. His limp speaks of Kandahar, of ambushes, of the night at the diner. Each scar is a story. Each pause is a promise. He sniffs each gate. Catalog scent, coyotes, mesquite, barn cats. Nothing predatory. Not tonight. He stops at each kennel window, studying sleeping dogs. When his tail flicks, the count is complete. At the southern boundary, where shelter lights surrender to wild land, he sits. The wind brings dust and distant cities. He listens with his whole body. Then he turns homeward. Daniel's apartment glows soft. 4 months ago, he slept with a knife under his pillow and dreams that marched like ghosts. But now, the door is cracked open. Inside, Echo snores. Daniel sits at the edge of the bed, writing. When Ghost chuffs at the door, Daniel doesn't rise. Door's open, Ghost. The shepherd enters, circles once, lays beside the bed like a sentry at ease. Daniel finishes his notes, training schedules, maybe a line of poetry. He clicks off the lamp, but leaves the door open to desert hush. Good night, Sergeant, he says, an old habit reclaimed. Ghost doesn't sleep yet. He listens to breathing, pipes ticking, the wind. When all is steady, when nothing stirs in fear, he rests his head. Outside, stars gleam above the wire mesh. Inside, alarms remain unset. And Daniel, for the first time in years, dreams without chains. The next morning, sunlight spills like brass across the shelter. A FedEx package rests on the step. Daniel bends stiff knees, opens it. Ghost sniffs cautiously. Inside, 3 service medallions and a letter. Pentagon seal embossed in silver blue. Unofficial agents of rescue, it reads. For bravery. For lives saved. For refusing to look away. Daniel laughs quiet, stunned. Ghost thumps his tail. Shade trots up. Echo bounds behind, sensing celebration. Each medallion bears a single word. Loyalty. Colorado Urage. Grace. Later, Eleanor finds Daniel in the workshop, sanding mesquite plank to silk. The letter lies nearby. They put it in writing, she says, eyes bright. Daniel nods. Feels bigger than us. Eleanor places a hand on his arm. Then let's hang it where people see what bigger really means. At sundown, volunteers gather. Sheriff Vega, Doug, Cassie, even old Benji. A marine blanket covers the easel by the gate. Daniel speaks. Some of you lived it. Some saw the footage. But all of you came here because 3 dogs didn't wait for orders. Ghost sits tall. Shade stands steady. Echo wiggles, proud. Daniel holds up the medallions. The Pentagon gave them these, but I call them family. He lifts the blanket. The mesquite plaque gleams, frame flanked by 3 hooks. Medals hang. Loyalty. Colorado Urage. Grace soft music in the desert wind. Cassie whispers to Echo. Good job, hero. Vega salutes not protocol, but heart. Later, porch lights warm the entry. Stars kindle overhead. Ghost starts his patrol. Daniel stays behind, fingers on the frame. Memory flickers chaos, then calm and gratitude. Eleanor joins him with Coco. Ghost vanishes into the mesquite, his metal-catching lantern glow like a star. They remembered us when we forgot ourselves, Daniel says. The wind carries the scent of creosote and tomorrow, and behind them, Bravo Shelter breathes safe, whole, and lit from within. The cold front swept in overnight, casting Bravo Shelter in a pale, winter-thin light. Frost rimmed the troughs, breath steamed with every exhale. Eleanor set out bowls of warm kibble as Ghost padded beside her, his paws crunching over the frozen dirt. A truck rumbled up the road. From it stepped Leanne Porter, widow, ranch hand, and her son, Micah, small and silent since the slide that took his father. 8 months had passed since the boy last spoke. "Welcome," Eleanor said, warmth in her voice. "I'm Eleanor, that big guy's ghost head of security." Ghost gave one solemn tail wag. Micah stared, silent. Grief hung on him like a saddle too heavy for his frame. Eleanor led them to the adoption kennels. In the third run sat Charlie, a young lanky pup with overgrown ears and the eyes of a soul desperate to give love. Charlie bounded out, paused, then sat obediently. Micah watched. Eleanor knelt beside the boy. "Charlie's still learning, but he's got a heart tuned to kids." Leanne offered her hand. Charlie dropped his head beneath it, but his eyes stayed fixed on Micah. Slowly, gently, Charlie approached one paw step at a time and sat, still and waiting. Micah didn't move. Charlie didn't push, just mirrored the boy's stillness. Micah's fingers, hidden in sleeves, crept out, hovered, then, with a breath like the first thaw of spring, rested in Charlie's fur. Leanne gasped. "That's the first thing he's initiated since," Eleanor whispered. "The dogs know. That's their language." Micah leaned in, wrapped his arms around Charlie's neck. No words, just a fierce hug. Eleanor crouched beside him. "Would you like Charlie to stay today?" Micah nodded. "Always?" His voice cracked thin and moth-wing fragile. "Yeah." Volunteers froze mid-hammer. Echo barked once Joy's alarm. Shade flicked his tail. "He's yours," Eleanor said. "Papers later. Today, they've got exploring to do." Charlie woofed once, trotting beside Micah as they disappeared behind desert marigolds. In the wildflower garden, Eleanor stayed back. Some moments needed witness, not interruption. Micah and Charlie sat near the herb wall, boy and dog face to face. Micah's hand found Charlie's snout, then neck, his forehead pressed against soft fur. "Stay," the boy whispered. It was barely sound, but Charlie heard. Tail swept the stone twice, answering with loyalty. Leanne, tears streaking wind-chapped cheeks, exhaled. 8 months of silence cracked like winter soil under sunlight. "Good boy," Micah whispered. Eleanor stepped forward softly. "Charlie heard that," she said, crouching. "Some dogs are born looking for one person. Charlie found his." "Mine." Micah breathed. Leanne crouched across from her son. "How does he make you feel?" Micah's palm rested on Charlie's neck. "Safe." Eleanor stood. "Then that's our job now. Making sure you both stay safe." Ghost approached, giving Charlie a quiet look acknowledgement from veteran to recruit. Charlie dipped his head. Ghost turned away, satisfied. Micah rose, drawn toward the play yard. Charlie matched his pace. At the gate, Micah glanced back at his mom, words forming but not yet spoken. It didn't matter. The connection had already formed. Later, tangerine light spilled across the courtyard. Micah wandered beneath the cedar trellis, Charlie close at his side. They stopped by the bronze plaque at the gate. Micah traced the words aloud, voice faint but present. For those who could not speak, but saved lives all the same. Charlie sat beside him. Eleanor approached, holding a blanket for the pup's first night. "Miss Eleanor?" Micah asked, voice gaining shape. "Does the sign mean Charlie and the others?" She nodded. "And Ghost, Echo, Shade, and any dog who listens when people forget how to speak." Micah's eyes lingered on the plaque. "Can I come back? To visit the ones still waiting?" Eleanor knelt, meeting his gaze. "You don't have to visit, Micah. This place is yours now. Come anytime. Sunlight or starlight. Bravo Shelter belongs to everyone who needs it." Micah's shoulders eased. Charlie nudged his arm gently, as if seconding the invitation. Ghost appeared, fresh from patrol, and offered the boy a silent nod. Micah reached out, timid fingers grazing the scarred fur of Ghost's neck. The old shepherd stood still, accepting. Leanne called from the truck. "Time to head home." Micah turned to Eleanor. "If we come tomorrow, will Charlie remember?" Eleanor smiled. "Dogs keep their promises better than clocks keep time." Micah hugged Charlie tight. Charlie leaned in. Then the boy and his dog jogged toward the truck. Ghost watched them disappear, then resumed patrol. Eleanor placed her hand on the plaque where Micah's fingers had lingered. Warmth remained. Charlie was waiting. She said to the dusk. "And so was Micah." Ghost huffed softly, tail brushing her boot. The porch lights flicked on. Inside, Echo barked for dinner. Shade responded with a deep woof. The scent of sage drifted on the air. And Bravo's shelter, breathing in sync with those it protected, held their stories in trust. Tomorrow would bring new arrivals. But tonight, silence wasn't absence, it was peace. A pale February sun slanted through Tucson's Civic Hall atrium, setting bronze statues aflame and turning buff-colored walls to honey. The place smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, a paradox of sterility and history. At the far end, where adobe meets marble, Cassie Fenley's crayon masterpiece now occupied pride of place inside a maple shadow box, haloed by track lighting. The unveiling ceremony had been modest by city business standards. No marching band, no podium flourish, just folding chairs, a string trio, and the hush of 30-odd citizens who understood the weight of simple things done well. Now the crowd had thinned. Maintenance staff rolled tables back into storage. Sunbeams crawled a little farther across the terrazzo floor, stitched with reflections from stained glass skylights overhead. Eleanor lingered. So did Daniel. Ghost, Shade, and Echo lay at their sides like living bookends. One scarred sentinel, one restless scout, and one exuberant heart, gradually learning poise. Charlie had stayed at the shelter to mind the pups Micah's solemn promise to help him guard the newbies. The boy would visit tomorrow. Today belonged to the picture he'd inspired. Cassie's drawing seemed larger framed, 3 German shepherds braced in desert sun, protecting a bound marine whose lifted eyes glowed with the promise of rescue. Above them, in blocky primary crayon letters, the girl had written Guardians. Now, beneath the picture, a gleaming brass plate added its own epitaph. The bravest don't always wear badges. Some have fur, 4 paws, and the patience to wait for what's right. Eleanor read it twice, then let her gaze blur so that the words softened into weight rather than shape. She felt Ghost press gently against her calf, the subtle touch he used when her thoughts drifted too far from present ground. "Still fits," Daniel murmured beside her. He wore a pressed denim jacket, the Pentagon medallion Unofficial Agent of Rescue pinned just above the pocket. He touched the metal self-consciously, thumb brushing engraved lines. "It's strange," he added, "seeing a war remembered in a child's handwriting." Eleanor nodded. "Strange and perfect." She traced the frame's edge. "You can parade uniforms and medals, but sometimes it takes crayon to tell the exact truth." Echo rose, front paws on the velvet rope, nose inches from the glass. His reflection, ears huge, eyes bright, stared back in double. He huffed, fogging the pain, then sat again as if satisfied the art remained safe. A soft pair of footsteps approached. Councilwoman Lou, who championed the exhibit, offered a gentle smile. "Visitors keep stopping to stare," she said. "Security tells me folks touch the plaque when they read it. We'll need to buff fingerprints weekly." "Let them touch it," Eleanor answered. "That's how stories stick." Lou's eyes flicked to the dogs. "It's city property now," she said softly, teasing but sincere. "Think your guardians will loan us their protection?" Ghost's tail swept once. Shade chuffed a single syllable of approval. Echo tried to mirror Shade's gravitas, producing a squeak that made Daniel chuckle. Lou laughed, hand over heart. "I'd call that a yes." She moved off to coordinate custodians, leaving the small knot of humans and dogs inside streaming light. A hush settled thicker than museum, quiet, warm as sunrise on canyon walls. Daniel stepped closer to the frame. He traced the air just above the marine, figure the rope, the bent knees. "Funny thing," he whispered. "I don't remember sunlight inside that SUV. But Cassie drew it bright, like the rescue was already shining before you ever broke the window." Eleanor's throat tightened. She drew it the way it felt afterward. Sometimes memory rearranges shadows to keep the heart from drowning. He breathed out, slow, steady. Then we better keep earning that sunlight. Echo nudged his leg. Daniel crouched, despite the ache that flared in healing muscles. Ready for another road trip tomorrow, buddy? Echo's ears shot up. We've got retraining visits at the VA, then the school talk next week. Lot of listening to do. The dog's tail answered, "Yes, sir," with broad sweeps. Shade ambled to the lobby doors, eyes scanning passersby habit of vigilance. Ghost lay down at Eleanor's feet again, but his gaze never left the brass plate. Guarding art, guarding memory, same mission. Outside, the distant clatter of a streetcar drifted in. Wind pushed the scent of grilled chilies through revolving doors, twined with exhaust and city dust. Life carried on a rough anthem against which hope must speak clearly, or not at all. Eleanor checked her watch. Feeding time soon. She touched the glass one last moment, fingers cool on the protective pane. "Sun's moving," she said to Daniel. "Time we do, too." They turned for the exit. Ghost rose. Echo pranced. Shade fell in. As the group crossed the threshold, afternoon light struck Cassie's drawing anew, igniting yellows, oranges, and the single word, Guardians, until it glowed like a promise etched across the city's beating heart. Outside, Eleanor glanced back through the lobby wall of windows. She pictured Micah arriving on his next visit, standing where she'd stood, small palm pressed to that brass line about fur and patience. She imagined the boy reading it out loud, stronger voice each time until the words belonged as much to him as they did the dog's. "Yes," she whispered to nobody in particular. "The bravest don't always wear badges." And behind her, paw steps on polished concrete tapped quiet agreement as they headed toward the truck, the shelter, and whatever waited just beyond the bright desert horizon. Desert nights settle the way a quilt drapes an old soldier's shoulders. Slow, deliberate, comforting despite its frayed edges. By 10:30, every bulb in Bravo Shelter's kennel wing had dulled to amber, casting soft halos over slumbering silhouettes. Far off, a train horn sighed through the Santa Cruz Valley, its note long and lonely. Coyotes answered in ragged harmony, then fell quiet again. On the porch of the main office, Eleanor sat in a weather-worn rocker, one boot propped on the railing. The day's dust still streaked her jeans, but she hadn't bothered to change. She cradled a tin cup of chamomile tea, steam rising in pale ribbons that vanished into starlight. Next to her, stretched full length on the pine planks, lay Ghost head high, ears pricked, chest moving in the slow tide of an animal at rest, yet never off duty. They made a study in contrasts. The woman easing into middle age with silver flirting at her temples. The dog carrying seasons of scars like medals no ceremony could highlight. Yet in posture and presence they mirrored each other, each keeping watch over something larger than themselves. Eleanor sipped, letting the quiet seep into muscle and bone. From this perch, she could see the narrow gravel track leading to the highway, a pale ribbon under moonlight. No headlights tonight, only the steady glow of the sodium yard lamp and the flicker of the office's porch bulb. Safe. Enough. Inside the apartment wing, a curtain shifted. Troy Maddox, the other rescued Marine, months into healing, pressed a shoulder to the window frame. He traded hospital gowns for soft flannel and worn denim, but the brace still hugged his left knee, and his eyes carried that distant watchfulness all combat vets share. The glow behind him outlined a mug of cocoa steaming on the sill, forgotten. Troy's gaze slid from Eleanor to the yard, following Ghost's unmoving silhouette. Shade prowled the fence line at a lazy pace, nose skimming dirt. Echo slept in a playbow, paws twitching as he dreamed of frisbees and triumphant barks. Charlie was absent, no doubt, curled in Micah's bedroom back at the Porter Ranch, but the pack felt whole despite distance. Every dog had learned the freedom of a place claimed by belonging. Troy breathed out, fogging the glass. They're not strays anymore, he thought. They're stationed. The idea loosened something tight in his chest. On the porch, Eleanor spoke without turning. Couldn't sleep? Troy cracked the window an inch. Night air drifted in, laced with sage and cooling adobe. Not yet, he admitted. Sometimes quiet is too loud. Eleanor chuckled softly. Tell me about it. She nudged Ghost's shoulder with her boot. The dog huffed, shifted closer, head resting against her shin. Ghost thinks the silence sings if you listen long enough. Troy leaned on the sill, arms folded. What's it singing tonight? Home, she said simply. The words settled into the beams overhead, into the floorboards beneath, into the slow wag of Ghost's tail. Home had been a moving target for each of them. A diner floor bathed in neon, an armored Humvee somewhere outside Fallujah, a ranch road washed out by landslide. Now it was this: cedar-smelling kennels, children's laughter at dawn, the scrape of food bowls at 6, and the rhythmic thud of a sentinel's paws patrolling perimeter. Troy watched Shade pause at the far corner, nose pointed toward something unseen. The dog's body language eased just a jackrabbit bedding down. Shade returned to his route. "You think dogs know the difference between a post and a belonging?" Eleanor considered. "I think they know when they're needed. Maybe that's the same thing." Ghost lifted his muzzle, scanning the Orion-studded sky. A faint breeze riffled his fur, revealing the long, pale scar across his flank. Eleanor traced it lightly with her gaze, ache and gratitude braided in her heart. "This old fellow's taught me scars don't finish a story," she said. Troy's laugh was low, earnest. "If they did, I'd be a closed book." He flexed the knee brace. Metal hinges clicked, but the motion held no pain tonight. Moonlight painted the shelter yard in silver brushstrokes. The training cones cast dagger-thin shadows. The wooden agility ramp glowed like bleached bone. In that lucid glow, every angle of the small sanctuary looked deliberate, built to cradle the broken until they remembered how to run. Troy lifted his cocoa, blew across its surface. "Daniel says we're expanding the quarantine wing next month. More rescues coming in from the border sweeps." Eleanor nodded. "And a classroom off the clinic. Micah wants to read to the shy ones. Says Charlie told him it helps." Troy's grin tugged crooked. "Kid speaks fluent dog." "Best language there is," Eleanor replied. They slipped into companionable silence. The rocker creaked, a lullaby timed to Ghost's breathing. Shade completed his circuit and trotted onto the porch, nosing Troy's hand through the window gap. Echo, awakened by footfalls, ambled sleepily to flop beside Eleanor's chair. His soft whine registered contentment, not need. Troy reached out, fingers brushing Shade's muzzle. "You know," he said, voice thick with something like reverence, "first night I spent here I bolted the door. Chair under the knob. Now I leave it open for Echo." Eleanor smiled in the dark. Unlocked doors are a privilege earned daily. A hush fell deeper, as if the desert itself leaned in to listen. Stars multiplied in the black, sharper than city folk ever see. Somewhere a nightjar cheered. A lizard skittered beneath mesquite. Ghost rose, shook once, then settled again, this time with his back to Eleanor, facing the yard. His tail swept porch dust in steady strokes. A guardian's lull. Eleanor set her empty cup on the rail. Her voice came soft, half lullaby, half benediction. "We're good, Ghost. All souls accounted for." The shepherd's only answer was a gentle sigh, eyes half closing yet still vigilant. Troy closed the window with care, drawing curtains wide enough to keep watch from his pillow. He turned off the lamp, leaving only moonwash to guard the room. As he lay down, Echo padded in, circled once, and collapsed at the bed's foot with a contented grunt. The door remained unlatched, open to the corridor's soft light. Outside, Eleanor stood, stretching tired limbs. She scanned the dark beyond the fence, nothing but night and possibility, and felt peace settle into her ribs like a steady drum. No, they were no longer strays. They were home, and the desert, vast and star-split, kept silent watch with them until dawn's first blush whispered it was time to begin again. A pale pastel dawn bled across the western horizon, lavender sliding into rose before the sun breached the hills. Cold air carried the metallic scent of dew-damp wire and distant creosote. At Bravo Shelter's gate, a faded American flag fluttered its colors washed by desert sun, edges frayed but threads still holding. Ghost sat beneath the pole like a marble lion, watching the road. The rumble came first, old transmission, gravel under tires. A county animal control van crested the rise, trailing dust like a comet tail. Behind it, a beat-up station wagon and a motorcycle with a milk crate strapped to the back. 3 vehicles, 3 stories converging. Eleanor wiped sleep from her eyes, stepped onto the porch, and adjusted the wool shawl over her shoulders. Daniel joined her, thermos steaming between his palms. They exchanged a glance, equal parts anticipation, and resolve the kind you share before opening a book whose first line already stirs your heart. Deputy Mendez hopped from the van, clipboard in hand. "Morning," he called, voice fogged by the crisp air. "Got your latest guests. Border sweep pulled them from an abandoned warehouse off 119. The van doors eased open. First emerged a brindled hound mix ribs, showing eyes wide with the shock of daylight. Next, a pair of litter sisters, tiny terrier bodies trembling beneath oversized ears. Finally, a massive Anatolian shepherd eased onto the ramp, limping but dignified old warrior in civilian clothes. From the station wagon stepped a grizzled rancher cradling a shoebox. Inside, a damp, soot-smudged kitten rescued from a barn fire 2 nights prior. The man tipped his hat, voice breaking as he handed the box to Eleanor. "Couldn't leave her alone, ma'am." Last, the motorcycle rider shut off her engine, helmet visor flipping up to reveal wind-chapped cheeks. She unstrapped the crate inside, a senior chihuahua wrapped in a blanket patterned with dancing bones. "Her owner passed," she said quietly. "She needed somewhere kinder than asphalt." Echo, Shade, and Charlie formed a semicircle behind Ghost, tails low but wagging a receiving line. Micah, bundled in a Navajo blanket, stood at Charlie's flank, holding a clipboard and a fistful of colored name tags. His silent focus radiated something steadier than speech. "Welcome home," Eleanor whispered to the new arrivals. They moved with practiced choreography. Daniel guided the Anatolian toward the clinic, Shade pacing beside to reassure. Echo coaxed the hound mix along the crushed stone path, stopping every few feet to lie down, inviting trust. Charlie escorted the terrier sisters to the play yard gate, where early sun already warmed the sand. Micah knelt there, placing 2 tags, Hazel and Nutmeg, over tiny heads with reverent precision. Inside the clinic, Eleanor weighed the kitten a mere puff of soot-gray fur and fragile heartbeat. She looked up to find Ghost sitting just beyond the threshold, watchful. "You're too big for the scale," she teased. Ghost's tail thumped once. His eyes never left the kitten until it mewed and pressed its face into Eleanor's palm. By mid-morning, the hound mix napped in fresh straw. The terriers chased each other between agility cones, and the Anatolian, now dubbed Atlas, lay on a foam mat while Daniel irrigated a wound. Volunteers stitched new names onto kennel cards, laughter floating above hammer taps as they reinforced the quarantine wing roof. The shelter felt like a chest expanding to fit a bigger breath. At noon, they gathered beneath the flagpole. The faded banner snapped eastward, revealing its threadbare stripes. Deputy Mendez stood beside Daniel, hands shoved in pockets, gaze on the cloth. "Needs replacing," he muttered. Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. Its scars mean something here." Eleanor approached with a pitcher of fresh water for the trough. She looked up at the frayed emblem, sun blazing through thin spots to create ruby pinholes against the sky. "It reminds the new ones they can survive weather too." Micah edged closer, his kitten passenger tucked in his jacket. "Eyes on the flag," he signed clumsily, but clearly hope holds. Eleanor rested a hand on his shoulder. "Yes," she said aloud. "Hope holds." Troy appeared then, brace gone, cane used mostly from habit. He unfolded a scrap of paper quotes he collected since the courthouse day. He cleared his throat, voice rasped but sure. "Sometimes heaven doesn't send thunder. It sends pause." He looked at Eleanor. "Thought it belonged here." Silence settled tender as snowfall. Ghost broke it with a soft bark, echoing. Shade's rumble vibrated the boards beneath their feet. Charlie's enthusiastic yip lifted the note to laughter. Daniel stepped forward, tacking Troy's quote onto the flagpole with a galvanized nail. The paper fluttered, words dancing against faded stripes, like a prayer written in wind. "Sometimes heaven doesn't send thunder. It sends pause." Afternoon stretched. Atlas, bandaged and drowsy, limped into the courtyard, tail twitching at new scents. Hazel and Nutmeg discovered the fountain and drenched themselves head to paw. The hound from the warehouse found Micah's side and stayed, head under the boy's palm. Volunteers updated a chalkboard tally. Dogs rescued 47. Dogs adopted 33. Lives changed countless. Eleanor watched from the porch, Ghost leaning against her leg. She thought of a diner bell, a 3-tap signal, a Marine half dead behind blackout glass. She thought of Cassie's drawing and that brass plate shining like a second sunrise. Legacy, she realized, isn't carved only in stone or sealed in Pentagon envelopes. It's in tail thumps on kennel doors at dawn, in the shimmer of a frayed flag still flying, in a boy finding words because fur listened before anyone else. It's a network of paw prints crossing human hearts, leaving them sturdier than before. Daniel joined her, wiping grease from his fingers. Atlas has a home lined up with a retired rancher near Sells, he said. Hazel and Nutmeg, a local teacher. She promised reading circles and endless treats. Eleanor smiled, eyes crinkling. And the hound? He glanced at Micah, who dozed under a mesquite, boy's arm draped over the hound's speckled back. I think that one already filed adoption papers verbally. Figures. She exhaled, lungs filling with the scent of hay, disinfectant, fresh promise. Ready for whatever rolls down that road next? Daniel looked at the gathering of dogs, old and new, sprawled across sun-patched earth. Ghost rose, scanning the horizon one last time before dusk. Shade settled near the gate. Echo herded wind-blown leaves with puppy zeal. Charlie snored into dust. More than ready, Daniel said. This place was built for futures. The flag snapped again, a battered anthem refusing quiet. And underneath, paws traced patterns on desert ground, echoes of yesterday, signatures of tomorrow, proof that thunder isn't always the herald of change. Sometimes, salvation pads in softly, tail wagging, waiting for the moment a human heart is brave enough to open the gate. Some stories don't need grand endings. They just need a quiet moment, a warm gaze, and a heartbeat resting beside yours. German shepherds like Ghost and Charlie don't speak our language, but somehow they say exactly what we need to hear. They remind us of loyalty without condition, of love that stays even after the world turns cold, and of the silent power of presence just being there. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt understood, you know what I mean. If you're looking for ways to deepen that bond, to understand them a little more, or maybe just say thank you in a way they'd feel there's a resource I came across that might help. It's gentle, thoughtful, and made with the kind of care I think you'll appreciate. No pressure, of course. Just something I'd share with a friend over coffee, and a story about a good dog who changed everything. Take your time. They always do.